It's time for Twig. This week in Google, we're going to break format today for, I think, one of the most important shows we've ever done. Jeff Jarvis is here. Aunt Pruitt is here. And our special guest, filling in for Stacy this week, she'll be back next week. Our special guest is Alex Stamos. This guy has been on the front lines of the security battle starting at Yahoo, then Facebook. He worked at Zoom and helped bring them into compliance. He's right now at the Stanford Internet Observatory. He is the security guru. He's next on Twig.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Twig. This week in Google, episode 692, recorded Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. Alex Stamos. This week in Google is brought to you by Nareva. Nareva has simplified everything about meetings and classroom audio. You get great audio in systems that are easy to install and manage. Visit nareva.com/twit and get 50% off one Nareva HDL300 system for mid-sized rooms when you get a live online demo and buy before December 16th, 2022. And by Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill. Are you wasting money on subscriptions? Cancel your unnecessary subscriptions right now at rocketmoney.com/twig. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. And by SecureWorks. Are you ready for inevitable cyber threats? SecureWorks detects evolving adversaries and defends against them with a combination of security analytics and threat intelligence directly from their own counter-threat unit. Visit secureworks.com/twit to get a free trial of Taegis Extended Detection and Response, also known as XDR. It's time for Twig. This week in Google, the show we cover the latest news from everybody but Google pretty much these days. Certainly been a lot of Twitter, maybe a little Facebook, but this week is a very, very special show. Before I introduce our special guest, let me say hello to Jeff Jarvis, the Leonard Tao Professor for Journalistic Innovation at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. Hello, Jeff.
Hello. I'm very excited about today's show.
I know, and you're to blame for it, so I thank you.
I am. It's my fault.
I think it was your idea.
The Christmas tree lights are on, in celebration of today, yeah.
Oh, we got to decorate. This is the last day of November. It means we can put up the boughs of holly.
Last time.
Do you remember we did that last time on Twig? Aunt Pruitt's also here from Hands On Photography. Last year, I just issued an edict, and it all came in, and
it like literally just got
Santa
thrown
just threw
in.
up on the studio. Hands On Photography, also very important, our community manager at Club TWiT. Now, Jeff, do you want to introduce Alex or shall I?
No. You should introduce Alex.
So we have been, Alex, it's rare we get the subject of many of our stories actually sitting in the studio with us, which makes me really nervous.
So I hope tell us where we're wrong.
Yeah, I hope I haven't been too off base. But you know the name Alex Stamos. We talk about Alex a lot. He's a principal in Krebs Stamos Security, which is a security consultancy. But we've been talking about you, Alex, since you were at Yahoo. Were you CISO? What was your title there?
Yeah, I was CISO at Yahoo and CSO at Facebook.
And Facebook, where you famously got in a tussle with management over Russian entities invading Facebook.
That is how it has been reported. Yes, I guess we'll get into it.
Oh, I can't wait. Oh, gosh. I can't. We now have permission to dish.
Oh, no.
We now have permission to dish. When Zoom got in trouble because they were claiming end-to-end encryption, it turned out it wasn't end-to-end encryption. They said, we got to call in the pros from Dover. The pro from Dover was Alex Stamos. Sent up the bat signal. And I have to tell you, as a user, I was very relieved. No. Your reputation precedes you.
Yep.
And currently you are teaching at Stanford, which is kind of cool. And a fellow, tell us about what this is, the Internet Observatory. What is that?
Yeah, so that's a cross-disciplinary program that I'm the director of. We're part of the Cyber Policy Center and Stanford Law School. And we look at abuse of the internet that causes harm outside of core cybersecurity, right? So core cyber information security belongs to computer science. It already has a home in academia. What we're trying to do is to create a home for trust and safety, right? So studying hate speech, the use of the internet to support terrorism, bullying and harassment, child exploitation. We do a lot of work in that area, research. We teach a bunch of classes, have a book coming out, a textbook on trust and safety. So that's the kind of stuff we do there.
Trust and safety is a phrase you hear a lot nowadays, most particularly attached to the name of Yoel Roth.
Yes.
Who was the chief of trust and safety at Twitter when Elon bought it. Yoel tweeted extensively about, don't worry, everything's going to be fine, and then was fired.
Yeah.
What is a trust and safety?
Or no, Yoel was fired or he quit? I think he walked out.
Yoel walked out because he said there's no point in having a trust and safety officer if one man is making all the decisions.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah, because usually trust and safety, you have policy people who think about what are the rules we want, right? Like, let's define a basic rule around hate speech. And then something like hate speech turns out to be incredibly complicated to figure out just in English in the United States what hate speech is.
You can't just set up a list of keywords that you're looking for.
No, that's like that. When I teach my class, we talk exactly about people who have tried that and what happens when you're like, these are just racial slurs that you aren't allowed to say.
Can't say the N-word. Oh, that's easy. We'll just get rid of all of those.
Right. And then every rap lyric and half the movies,
but
historical
also,
stuff. You can't.
The people who troll are very subtle sometimes and sophisticated.
Right.
And they can say things like Hunter Biden's laptop in 12 different ways.
Right.
And suddenly you've got a problem.
Right. Trust and safety is a naturally adversarial process. You can't just come up with some kind of static rule. You are playing chess against people who sometimes it's the emergent behavior of millions of people or billions of people.
So it's sometimes not intentional necessarily.
Right. And sometimes it is intentional. Right. So in some of these abuse types, you're talking about professional who are making money or trying to cause harm or manipulate the political sphere.
And sometimes it's an individual who's just a troll, and sometimes it's a government.
That's right. Yeah. And that's something our work we do a lot of at Stanford IO is we write reports on government influence operations. We do a lot of work to try to understand how is the Russian government manipulating the internet? How is the Indian government? This year we wrote one about the U.S. government. We were part of analyzing a takedown on both Twitter and Facebook that turned out to be a 5-year campaign targeted at Iran and other places in the Middle East, in North Africa, that was paid for by the U.S. Department of Defense. And so that triggered a series of articles in the Washington Post. And apparently, from what I've heard, now a review at the top levels of the Pentagon of like what our policy should be as a government about doing Russian-style influence operations.
I'm sure the one argument is, well, we got to fight fire with fire. I'm
sure that's the argument they made. Unfortunately, they were fighting a forest fire with a match because they really sucked at it, right? Like, this is one of the outcomes of looking at this is, one, it's just, from my perspective, ethically wrong for a democracy like the U.S.
We should not engage in that behavior.
Right, like creating fake Iranians and fake pressure groups.
It's like torture. It's like so many other things that others do doesn't mean we should do it.
Right, just as an American, I don't think it's right. But if I didn't care about that, I would also just say it was stupid because it turns out our tweet announcing our report ended up getting more engagement than anything else that the U.S. government paid for during that period of time. So somebody made some government contractor, and I can't say who I think it is because we haven't totally proved who it is. There are some contracts like the DoD database you could try to pull, figure it all out. But that contractor made tens of millions of dollars to do worse than we could do with like a couple of undergrads if that was what we were trying to do.
Elon has taken to call these psyops.
Yes.
This is his new thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's using it in the kind of red pill troll way of anytime that somebody says something he disagrees with, it's a psyop. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, psyop, you could use that term. We use influence operation is the term we use because, fake news is a term that got taken over immediately by President Trump and meant nothing anymore.
That's, by the way, a smart adversarial maneuver. If you don't like something, you can co-opt that phrase and make it meaningless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, he took that and owned it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not really disinformation, misinformation are based upon something being false. And a lot of this stuff is not necessarily factually false. A lot of it's not falsifiable, right? Like, even if you look at Russian behavior in 2016 on Twitter and Facebook, a lot of the stuff they were saying were kind of radical political statements that don't have a falsifiable fact in them, right? So we have too many immigrants and that's ruining America. Is that true or false? We all have opinions on that, but you can't really have a fact check, right, on that. And that's the kind of stuff that often these propaganda outlets push.
Is that the flooding the zone thing that we talk about?
Yeah, and definitely that's part of the goal for these folks is to try to create the idea that you might have this radical position or you're trying to push a radical position in a democratic adversary. You want to make it look like the position is supported by a huge number of people when it's actually a minor minority, right? But you could try to create all that noise and intimidate people who have more mainstream opinions to perhaps push themselves to the outside because it's what the crowd is doing.
It's also trivially easy because we're naturally built to, well, I see it all over the place. It must be true. Everybody's saying it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons influence operations work is it plays on some really natural human behavior. We seek out information that makes us feel good about ourselves, that makes us feel that we're right, that we're part of the good group, the in-group.
Affirms our beliefs.
Yeah, and so that's like a natural thing that human beings have always done. The internet just makes it so much easier, right? Like, we're not in the era where, your prototypical madmen, the man comes home from work and puts his 50s hat up on the coat rack and has like a Wall Street Journal and, a New York Times, and then can turn
That's you and me, Jeff, by the way.
can turn on Walter Cronkite and then 2 other stations.
Now
right?
I know what's the truth.
Right. It's like your choices were from 5 or 6 commercial outlets.
Yeah.
And now the fact that you have 10,000 different outlets you can choose from, you can self-select yourself into those kinds of...
It should be good, too. I mean, Jeff's often argued against the Eli Pariser filter bubble argument, saying that, but we do have all these other sources. We are exposed to other information.
Right, and there is real empirical evidence that people are exposed to way more information now than they were in those eras.
And that's could be as beneficial as it is negative.
So there are certain Harvard professors that Jeff has mentioned multiple times on this show who are completely and totally incorrect in their books. And you can tell that there's a whole strain of kind of academic tech criticism that's not at all empirical. It's not based upon any evidence. It's just based upon and it's a great example because they are believing the things they've been told that make them feel like they're the good guys. So it's... Yeah.
I just read a great paper, Alex, by Peter Turnberg.
Okay.
He read a couple of them talking about sorting as the way to look at this. That it's not about disagreement; it's about identity, and we put ourselves into a certain identity, and then it leaches out from politics into the rest of life. What car you drive, how you drink your coffee, everything else becomes a way to sort yourself in society, and that's not really filter bubbling. It's not about information and disinformation. It's about identity as much as anything else.
It's not only how we think of ourselves, tribalism, it's how advertisers think about us. I remember 30 years ago, a company called Claritas coming in and doing an interview. Guys saying, well, tell me your zip code. I'll tell you what kind of car you drive, what magazines you subscribe to. Yeah. We sort ourselves.
Started it all.
Yeah. There was a recent, apparently, operation on Twitter from the Chinese government.
Right.
To hide both city names and hashtags and accounts talking about the protests going on in China by flooding those with pornography.
Yeah, so we're looking into this right now. So I don't want to scoop my team too much, but I'll give a little preview, which is there seems to be a spam operation that we can't attribute to the Chinese government. Things have just gone bad at Twitter. So the truth is the number of people working on spam there is falling apart. Yeah. Effectively, the entire team that worked on government influence operations is gone. It has evaporated. There's 2 people left on the team that do child safety. It's just the trust and safety teams there have been decimated first by the layoffs and then by their main people quitting. Because, just like with UL, if you work in trust and safety, if you're somebody who works in child safety, you have to expose yourself to the worst of humanity every single day. Yeah. You're clearly a person who doesn't do that for money. You are mission driven. And if you feel the person who sits at the top does not share your mission, you're not going to last long. And that's true for all these folks who work on hate speech, who work on government influence ops. They just don't believe Elon's got their back, and so they've quit. And it's also effectively a 0% unemployment rate for trust and safety professionals right now because everybody has this problem. That's the other thing that people haven't really thought about too much is we have this huge long tail of new social media companies, and they all have the same kind of issues, except they don't get to grow up with the bad guys like Facebook did, right? They have to deal with the people who've been cutting their teeth against Facebook for 15 years. Yeah. And so
they know all the tricks.
Right. And so like if you're working at Twitter, if you've seen the worst of the worst, you're going to have 10 job offers by the end of the week if you end up quitting. So anyway, so what's going on in China, there is a massive spam issue that is involved with cities. There's no evidence that that's actually been driven by the Chinese government.
Oh, interesting.
It's a hell of a coincidence, but we have looked back and have found other explosions of this kind of spam before. It's escort spam mostly. Yeah. And what they're doing is they're doing photos of women with QR codes. You scan the QR code, it does a couple redirects and sends you to a WeChat channel or a phone number that you can
So it's intended for
arrange
Chinese citizens.
It's intended for Chinese citizens and overseas Chinese. Now, Twitter is blocked for most Chinese citizens, and so it's an interesting place to do Chinese spam.
Seems like it'd be not productive.
There's a pretty good sized Chinese diaspora of people who live either in Macau or Hong Kong of Chinese SARs where they have less of a great firewall, or that are Mandarin speakers, simplified Chinese readers who live elsewhere, right? So that's going on. At the same time, there is a trolling campaign along the lines of what we've seen out of the PRC in the past, which is they have a capability that's referred to as the 50-cent army, which is a huge number of patriotic individuals that they're able to mobilize in these situations. Traditionally, so the best paper on this was written by one of my Stanford colleagues as part of her PhD dissertation, Jen Pan, who explored this whole thing, and it's changed a decent amount since her time, since she wrote that, because now their ability in English is much improved. And so you've seen an effort for them to invest in not just trolling in a variety of Chinese dialects, but able to troll in English. And so that is going on, but I think we can't really tie the spam to that. I think the spam just demonstrates that Twitter's falling apart, right? That if you, because what happens is if you have a hashtag that's a big deal, the spammers flock to that hashtag.
Regardless, it's not politics.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just popular.
No, it's conferences.
It might even be automated, right? It might not even be them making a decision. And so the fact that we're in like day 3 or 4 of, if you look up these cities, I was looking at Wuxi, like just one Chinese city in Chinese characters, it's completely dominated by the spam. Like you can't see anything legitimate. And so no matter what, there's a breakdown at Twitter. And clearly, whether or not it's an intentional thing, which again, I can't say it's not, but I also can't say there's evidence that it is. In either way, it demonstrates a real failure there. Things are kind of really coming off. The wheels are coming off with Twitter because they don't have people who can have basic control over this kind of stuff.
I could easily dominate this interview, so I want to encourage and Jeff to get in. This is not triangulation. This is a panel conversation. Go ahead, Jeff.
Your conversation is fascinated.
Great. Yeah. But that, like I said, we could do 18 hours with.
Oh my God!
Alex.
Am I trapped here for 18
You're
hours?
trapped.
Yes, and there's no bathroom, Alex.
I do worry though, and I bet you worry too. One of the problems with being a police officer is you see the worst of humanity and pretty much colors your perception of the world. Has that happened to you?
Yeah. I mean, I have, my entire career has been dealing with people trying to cause harm. I mean,
how did you start in this? I'm eager for that kind of context.
So I started in the 80s when my Santa Claus brought me a Commodore 64 when I believe I was 7 or 8 years old and a 300 baud modem. And so I did a lot of stuff as a kid and teenager that for which the statute of limitations has run out.
You're happy to say, I might add.
Yeah. And then, but I was fortunate, went to I grew up in Sacramento, the Midwest of California, which means I can both ski and duck hunt, right? That's how you can tell. Went to like a nice public high school in Sacramento, was able to go to Cal, did electrical engineering, studied under Dave Patterson, kind of famous guy, who did some incredible work and then was able to get a career doing legit stuff. So, I had the economic opportunities and the educational opportunities that if I was growing up in Poland or, an ex-Soviet state at the same time would not have had.
You'd be in a ransomware gang.
I'd be wearing Adidas tracksuits.
Yeah. I see that so much. And maybe it's your generation. Maybe the younger generation won't be like this, but I think of people like Kevin Mitnick who took a career as a hacker and made a career as a security professional. Yeah. That seems to be the usual career path.
Well, it's a fun one because you can go and actually hack stuff all day and then get paid and not go to jail, right? You can go home at night and have a family and a real life and not live, not live day to day thinking you're going to get
What is it that attracts though your mind to that penetrating systems?
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun to break things, right? Like it's fun to. I like doing security, both attack and defense. Like I really enjoy doing incident response when it's not my incident. I really enjoy it as a consultant. It's less fun when you're a CISO.
It's like forensics. It's like you're the guy who comes in, there's a murder scene. Right. You got to solve it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I bet if you ask cops, they could never say this publicly, but privately, they're like, I kind of like being a murder detective.
Yeah.
Right? It sucks that somebody died, but like they enjoy the work. So fortunately, people aren't dying when we're talking about it. Something bad's happened and you get to investigate and understand, and unlike other forms of engineering, you have an adversary, right? So like you build the Golden Gate Bridge, your adversary is earthquakes and corrosion and wind, right? Non-intelligent things that you figure out how, and you build the bridge and then you're like, okay, we're done, right? You never build a bridge in security. You're playing chess. And whatever you do, you can't just read a bunch of books and play the perfect chess game. Your opponents always get better. And so I always found that from an attacker and defender perspective, it's a lot of fun to be playing against real people.
That's how Cliff
How about the psychology
in the Cuckoo's Egg?
Yeah.
That was what that whole book was about.
It's a great book.
We talked to Bill Cheswick, same thing. He was just an innocent, engineer who had to solve a problem, built, the first honeypot, and that's how you get into it.
Yeah.
But I bet because the human mind loves solving problems, these are some of the best, most interesting problems because it's a human adversary.
Right. I mean, if we were growing up in classical Rome, you'd have to be a philosopher or solve math or, a philosopher or whatever they called scientists. It's like, but if you grow up in the latter 20th, early 21st century and you want to pull things apart and figure out how they work, hacking's a pretty good way to do it.
These days it's the
But you're also hacking into the human brain.
Game. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I've always
a lot of
wondered
psychology
about
involved.
Matt Cutts, our friend Matt Cutts, dealing with, spam. You'd think he'd be just a growly, nasty, miserable person, and he's the nicest person I practically know. And how does it affect, because you're interested in both the engineering part of it, but also the human part of it,
right?
And seeing this part of humanity always, trying to be a step ahead of you. Does it ever get you down?
Yeah, well, so I mean, that's the change I made in my career. So before I joined Yahoo, I was just pure InfoSec, right? So I was a professional hacker. I worked as a consultant. I started my own consulting company. We did a lot of work for Microsoft. So if you remember those early trustworthy computing days, I spent a bunch of the early days of our marriage and several years up in Redmond breaking Microsoft products. And that's what I did.
That. Yeah.
And so, I did kind of just pure InfoSec, right? Which is about the programs, it's about the bugs, it's about the computers. And then when I joined Yahoo, obviously that was a huge part of my job. A huge part of it is in any executive position is just human management, right? One of the challenges with Yahoo is it was a very important company that was dying, right? And by the time I got there, they hadn't had a CISO for about 18 months.
They'd already, and we want to make this clear because I misstated this last week, they'd already had that billion user breach.
That's right.
That was in the history. That was in the past.
We did have a breach.
You had to clean up. You had to clean it up.
Right. So that billion user breach was something that we figured out was likely, but we never figured out the root cause.
Right.
Partially because Yahoo didn't have any logging at all, effectively. We had figured out because when I got there, the number one security problem was there's a massive account takeover issue.
Yes.
And so we did.
I remember that.
Yeah. And people
all
get
the
their Yahoo
time.
accounts getting taken over
all the time,
and then spammed.
Yep.
And it seemed to me, just from all my consulting work, this is totally statistically improbable compared to every other
People would call the radio show all the time. My Yahoo email's been taken over.
Yeah.
They're sending out spam, asking for money.
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Right. And so I asked my team, hey, I want you to do a statistical analysis of these accounts, and I gave them a bunch of cuts I wanted them to take. And we had this young lady who was an intern at the time, is now a lawyer. She went to law school, and she does great work. And I got to run into her professionally. It was just really cool. And she did all this data science of just cutting all the data. And one of the most interesting graphs was if you looked at the date of last password change for the accounts that were taken over. It was like this, and then there was a super drop-off.
Yeah.
And when you looked at that graph, that drop-off happened at the exact month. The resolution was only to the month, so we couldn't do to the day. The exact month that Yahoo had changed the way that passwords were stored. And so that was a pretty clear indication that there had been a breach of the older system. And this has happened before, over a year before I had gone to Yahoo, that there was a change in how passwords were stored and secured, that when that happened, they had closed a vulnerability that somebody had used. Now, we didn't have actual logs of how the data was stolen. We didn't have direct evidence. And so when we took this to Marissa and the other executive team, from their perspective, is like, can you prove it? And my answer is no. It's just highly suggestive evidence. And from their perspective, they're like, okay, well, we're not going to disclose anything because you can't prove anything, right? And at that time, Marissa, if you remember, Marissa took over because of an activist investor. By the time I joined, it was like a year and a half after she'd been there. The honeymoon was over. She had her own activist investor who was now pushing them to make money. She didn't want any kind of negative publicity at all. And so my relationship with her was mostly just her saying, can you absolutely totally prove something is true?
You're always the bad news guy, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what sucks about being a CISO, right? I would literally walk into a room in either Yahoo or Facebook and people would be like, oh, Stamos is here.
Yeah.
Can I say that, or did I just get you?
No.
You'll
We'll just bleep it.
Okay, right. But like, and
Swear all you want,
I don't
Alex.
think it was because of my personality or how I smelled or something.
No.
I think it was just I was the Grim Reaper, right? Like if I was in the room, something bad had happened.
We've actually been talking about this. What is the liability of a CISO?
Yes.
And why CISOs might leave? And I think it was probably on a TWiT. The conclusion was, well, the CISO's not liable. The CISO does have to bring this information to the board, does have to bring this information to the C-level.
Right.
But if they don't act, if they don't budget, are you liable?
Well, that's your position. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California has a slightly different opinion.
Because this was at the very first thing that happened when Elon took over Twitter was that memo went out from the council saying, you're on your own now with this FTC consent decree.
Right, because after like a week, I think, the same day, the day that they were supposed to write a letter to the FTC, the chief information security officer, the chief compliance officer, and chief privacy officer all resigned instead of signing that letter.
And they asked the engineers to self-certify.
Right, which is not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say, self-certifying is not. That's just
It's made up.
That's just made up. Right. Yeah. No, because the other thing that's going on that is in the back of the mind of those 3 C-levels, of which I have to say 2 of them are friends of mine.
They don't want liability.
Right, is that, have you talked about the Joe Sullivan situation at all?
Go ahead, tell us.
Yeah, so Joe Sullivan, who's my predecessor at Facebook, he's the reason I got the Facebook job, which I'll never forgive him for, right? He took me out to lunch. He asked me, he was leaving Facebook to go to Uber. He asked me to go to Uber with him. I had met Travis on a boat. I have a Travis story that's not for family podcast.
Sometimes you get a feeling about a guy.
Right, but like you could tell, just it's like, I do not want this guy to either meet my sister or be my boss, right? And so I was like, Joe, I'm not interested in working for Travis. He said, well, then you should take my job at Facebook, right? I'll put your name into it. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, nice, not now. But like, thanks, Joe.
At the time, it seemed like a good idea.
Right, seemed I was very
some
flattered.
Nice T-shirts.
At the Rangoon Ruby in Palo Alto. I was like, oh, Joe, I can't believe you're thinking of me. And then I was like, oh, look, it's a bus. It's a horrible, drippy bus of internal corporate politics. So Joe went to Uber, and while I was at Uber, there was a security breach. There was guys who also are bug bounty guys. So these guys who participated in bug bounties, but in this case, they kind of went well beyond the rules of what Uber or any other company allows in a bug bounty, actually grabbed user data, and then sent it to them demanding a bounty. Right. And this comes back to like the real problem with bug bounties is that bug bounties are a really good invention. The idea that big companies are going to pay hackers to find bugs and is going to pay them and then get the bug fixed. It's good for everybody. They're also a form of legalized extortion, right? The whole thing is an extortionate dance between
an unintended consequence of it.
Yeah, right. Of the company's not going to call the FBI on you and have your door kicked in, and they're not going to embarrass you publicly, and you'll fix the bug together and then move on and everybody's happy, right? Joe made a decision, which is probably not the decision I would made, but he called it a bug bounty. He paid them the money. He sent somebody over to have them sign an NDA, had them delete the data, and then didn't disclose anything.
We did talk about that.
Oh, I remember this story
now. Right.
Yeah.
And he was just convicted of 2 things. One, misprision of a felony, which is not reporting the initial crime to the government, and lying to the FTC because at the time, the Uber was already under an FTC audit, and the FTC was literally in his office.
So a CISO can be liable.
In this case, he is going to go to jail, it looks like.
Oh,
yeah.
gosh.
Now, I'm not neutral here. I've known Joe for a long time. I'm going to be writing a letter to the judge of asking for leniency here, partially because if you look at like the top 10 people in the United States who have put child molesters in jail, Joe Sullivan's probably on that list, just because he helped build during the early days of Facebook this incredible capability, which makes Facebook still reports 90% of the child porn.
They all come from Facebook. Yeah.
Right. It's about 90% of the overall reports globally that go to NCMEC is from Facebook.
We noted that remarkable.
And a lot of that is due to him and the work he did. There's other great people, Antigone Davis, a lot of great people, but he needs to deserve a lot of credit for that. And so it's like, you got to offset him making a mistake with the FTC with also the fact that any prison he goes to is going to be full of people who he put there, right? From one way
well, and also this is the dance that happens with bug bounties, and that it's kind of an unfortunate. But it probably happens a lot.
It happens all the time. It happened to me multiple times. Now, not in a situation where user data was exploited, but we would have bug bounty participants go off the reservation and then effectively blackmail us. We had this happen once that instead of having this guy arrested, which is what the legal team wanted, right? The legal team wanted to call, he was Canadian. the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted
they're
Police.
mean, man.
Right, they
mess
look
with
nice
those
in
guys.
like the red outfits and stuff. But it turns out they have a SWAT team.
Yeah, yeah.
And the SWAT team's not so nice.
Do not mess with the
They're
RCMP.
not, was this a boot, right? No. They blow the door in with like a Canadian flashbang, right?
Not sorry.
And that's what and I was like, hey, give me one more chance to stop this guy from blackmailing us.
Good.
And I called the guy's boss and I'm like, hey, he's about to be in real trouble. Somebody he trusts needs to talk him out of it. And he talked him down. And then like 6 months later, a story was written about me threatening his boss.
Oh, dear.
So it's like,
No.
there's like kind of no good but it's like every CISO runs into this of like, I didn't want some Canadian teenager to have a federal U.S. felony extradited to the U.S. for Computer Fraud and Abuse Act because he did something stupid, right?
Right.
Now, Joe, again, I think the decision he made was not the right one, but I can see how he got there. And certainly this decision is made it that nobody wants to be a CISO, right? That like, because he was told by Travis, by the CEO, don't disclose, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you've been told by the CEO and you've received advice from legal counsel that it's okay not to disclose, he's the one going to jail.
Not
feels
them.
very unfair.
Yeah.
Because Travis has just got his billions of dollars and is enjoying himself.
Yeah.
And didn't defend Joe, just threw Joe totally under the bus, right? Didn't come to the trial, didn't help him out in any way. The other thing going on is Dara took over Uber. And so Joe is really just a victim of a setup from inside of Uber where Dara's team was trying to make Travis look as bad as possible. And they're the ones who sent all of the information to the U.S. Attorney's Office and pushed for the prosecution. So anyway, to that context, if you're working for Elon Musk and you're like, you want me to sign this FTC letter after you fired every team that makes it possible? You're insane. Yeah.
Not going to do it. Let's take a little break. Hold on a second. Hold that thought. You're next. Okay. I'm sorry, but we do need to take a little break.
Yes, pay the bills.
This is awesome. Alex Stamos is our guest from the Stanford I.O. I like that, the Internet Observatory, the Stanford I.O. We're going to talk about his is it your Mastodon instance, or are you just a member of the Mastodon instance?
I run that Mastodon. We can talk about why.
Cybervillains.
Cybervillains.com, yeah.
We'll talk about why you don't want to join
Cybervillains.
cybervillains.com. But we will talk about Mastodon security, Twitter security. There's a lot to talk about with Alex Stamos, and we are thrilled beyond measure to have him in studio. What a great opportunity to kind of get the story from inside. We talk a lot about bug bounties. It seems like on balance, it's a good thing to have, because the other option is that these guys go to Zerodium or somebody and sell it.
Right.
And then it goes to a nation state, which is then weaponizing against us.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it's so fraught. And it's...
I mean, you're dealing with 20-year-olds often.
Yeah.
And they make...
No frontal lobe.
No frontal lobe. Yeah, right.
You know, what did you do as a 20-year-old?
Just dangle Hot Pockets in front of you. Do whatever you want.
It always works.
Well, just like all these other things, I think we put teenagers in these ridiculous, where they make a mistake on Instagram at 15.
Yeah, for the
like,
rest of their
thank
life.
God every single person in my social group was not recording everything I said when I was 15 years old.
Exactly. It's a sad thing. Do you have kids?
3, yeah.
How old are they?
They are 11-year-old girl, a 13-year-old son, a 15-year-old son. So we're right in
what
the
do you
middle.
talk to them about? What do you tell them?
So one, I do every year the speech to the 8th graders at my son's school.
Oh, are they lucky?
Oh boy, does he love that?
Okay, hang on. I do have to take a break. I want to hear the speech to 8th graders.
Wow.
Because we got a lot of 8th graders and people who are 8th grade in the brain listening and watching, including me.
This is true.
And I want to hear the speech to 8th graders. Alex Stamos, more coming up. Jeff Jarvis, Aunt Pruitt, great to have you. And our show today brought to you by Nareva. We're in this weird environment where some of the employees are at work, some of the employees are at home, and we have some go back and forth. We've got this hybrid work environment. And of course, that means your huddle room, your meeting room is getting a lot of use. You have an all-hands meeting. Half the people are there and half the people aren't. And the biggest problem, I can tell you right now, I know because I've lived through it, is audio. It's audio. You can go out, and a lot of companies do this. They spend a stunning amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars, to put in very elaborate video and audio conferencing systems. They have to have them tweaked constantly. They've got wires everywhere, microphones everywhere. And then, of course, you add with that product shortages, delays, supply chain, the amount of time your IT department now is devoting to just getting this huddle room working. It's just not a good solution. Customers want better. They want intelligent products that require minimal effort from IT to deploy and manage at scale, zero end-user training. They want Nareva, N-U-R-E-V-A. Nureva's been around for a while, but boy, this is their time. Their patented microphone mist technology gives you great audio without any of the wires, the microphones, without any of the tweaking, zero end user training. And it works for small and large spaces. It's basically a sound bar. It looks like a sound bar, but it gives you true full room mic pickup, just one or two microphone and speaker bars. If you can install a soundbar, you can install this yourself in half an hour. Maybe you got a big space you're going to put in two. Oh, it's going to take you an hour. You don't even have to get IT involved, or if you're in IT, you'll love it because the Nureva console means you go back to your office, and even if you have many huddle rooms, many conference rooms, many all-hands meetings, you can tweak them, set them, monitor them, turn them on and off, all from the console over the web. It's incredible. No more complicated maze of multiple mics and speakers and DSPs and switchers. Your room won't go offline for days. You can have it installed before this show is over. Some traditional systems require you to go around from room to room and tweak it, right? And get all this software. Nureva lets you monitor, manage, update, and adjust all your Nureva systems from a powerful cloud-based platform, the Nureva console. And it scales for large organizations for a fraction of the cost of these traditional systems. Take a look at this HDL 300 system. This microphone mist technology means everybody in the room can be heard clearly no matter where they're facing, no matter how they're social distancing. It fills the room with virtual mics. It's a patented technology. It's incredible. Right now, 50% off a Nureva HDL 300 system for mid-sized rooms when you get a live online demo, as long as you buy before December 16th, 2022. Go to Nureva, NUREVA.com/twit. The 300 is the perfect mid-sized system. There are bigger systems, there are littler systems, but I think this is, for most conference rooms, this is exactly what you need. NUREVA.com/twit. Great audio simplified with Nureva. Thank you, Nureva, for supporting This Week in Tech. You know, we're all about good audio. That's why we make people sit in front of big honking big microphones. That's one of the things that's amazing. Nureva.com/twit. Okay, you're on a Mac.
Yeah.
Alex Stamos. Not a Chromebook, not a Windows machine. Just had to notice that.
Can't really run Docker containers on my Chromebook.
So it's all in Docker, huh?
Yeah, a bunch of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Alex Stamos is our guest. I interrupted you, Ant. Did you have a question for Alex?
I want to hear his story first because I can piggyback off of his
the
story.
eighth grade lecture. Yeah. What do you tell kids in the middle school years? No frontal lobe, no executive function.
And when you knew you did what you did when you were their age.
Their every move is recorded on social media and posted on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok.
Right. All of their relationships with their friends are intermediated by technology.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
Right.
There's no more passing notes.
No, and that's one of the permanent changes, I think, from COVID, is COVID pushed all of the relationships online, and only 20% of it came back to in person. Like, you will see, we'll have a group of 15-year-olds in our basement, and we're like, we've got a pool table and a foosball table, and they're all sitting there texting each other
in the same
quietly.
daggum room.
Yeah,
yes, I've seen that.
They're sharing a pizza. You have kids? Yeah.
Yes. I have hard heads, and they sit in the same room.
High schoolers, actually one in college.
Text each other in the same room. Like, you're sitting right there.
My kids are 30 and 27, so I dodged this bullet.
Yes.
The internet was there, but they were using AIM. I even thought it weird. My daughter, who's 30 now, would do her homework with music and AIM and a video chat going on and all that stuff. But this has gone beyond that.
But she didn't have a phone in her pocket with a camera. It's the camera that gets them in trouble.
It's the camera.
Right?
Yeah.
So when I talk to the kids, there are obviously all kinds of bad things that happen to kids, but the really horrible, tragic outcomes, right? I'm not going to name any of the teenagers, but I when I teach my class, I talk about teenagers who actually ended up taking their own lives while I was CISO of Facebook, right? Due to them being exploited in some way.
God, yeah.
And those situations are because the kids didn't have anybody they could turn to that they felt that they could talk to once they made a mistake, once they kind of slipped up a little bit, that for them there is no outcome other than to take their own lives, right? And so I think a big thing that I say to the kids is, one of the metaphors I have is, I ask the kids, has anybody here ever been really badly hurt? Had an accident? And one kid raises their hand. I'm like, yes. And he says, oh, I ran through a plate glass window once. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's a good one, right? Like a glass door. was it scary? He's like, yeah, I was covered in blood. I was bleeding everywhere. And the kid's like, ew, you know.
Cool.
Yeah. And I ask him, so when you did that, were your parents angry at you? No. What were they? They were scared.
Right.
And that's what you have to teach these kids is like, yes, your parents spend all the time being angry about you about not turning in your homework or not walking the dog or fighting with your sister. When you're in real trouble, your parents want to protect you.
Boy, that's so good.
And you need
That's
to
great.
go, if you get into if you're talking to somebody online and you're like, I don't think this person is who they say they are. Or if you've done something like sent a photo to somebody and regretted it, it is much better for you to go talk to your parents at that moment than to try to fix it yourself. Because the worst outcomes are when you try to fix it yourself. And for the really bad child abusers, they know that. And so they create a Stockholm syndrome, a fake relationship where it's you and me against your parents.
There's a horrific story just happened in Santa Rosa up here. Teenage girl catfished.
Yes.
Guy figures out where she lives, comes to her house, kills her mother and her grandparents, and abducts her and drives off with her.
Wow.
Horrific story because she was catfished.
Right. That's like the worst outcome is when you have in-person abuse.
They, by the way, they caught him and she escaped safely, thank God. And they've got the perpetrator. But her parents, mom and her grandparents are gone.
Yeah.
Horrific story.
Right.
And that's catfishing. That's posing as
it's
somebody
catfishing,
else.
and then where catfishing often goes, where it becomes really harmful, is called sextortion, where you trick a kid into giving you a naked photo, and then you leverage that into more and more control over their behavior.
A parent, good friend of mine, just happened to a 17-year-old.
Yes, it's extremely common, and that's where you need to teach your kids. One, you don't want to be victim blaming, but you also want to teach kids, like, you don't send naked photos to your friends. Ever. It's like, you have to teach teenage girls that teenage boys are idiots, right? Like, I don't think they understand how dumb we were, and maybe still are, but certainly how dumb I was when I was 15 years old. Yeah. Teenage boys have no impulse control, no ability. And so you have like these, nobody dies, but it's a big deal if you end up with a naked photo being distributed with friends, and it's technically distribution of child sexual abuse material. Technically, a bunch of those kids are committing a felony.
Well, but the next extortion could go far worse.
Right. But that's bad. And then if it goes worse, that person that you shared the image with is an adult who's an extortionist, then they will turn that into a multi-month hell. And so we had this guy who...
That's where you get suicides. That's
where you
really
get suicides.
sad.
And we had this guy who we called the worst man on Facebook, which is like a pretty high bar. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And we spent 2 years tracking this one guy because his OPSEC was perfect. He never made a mistake. He never used a real phone number. He never used a real IP. He was on tour all the time. And he approached thousands of teenage girls. It turns out later we find out he was tracking how he was approaching them and what approaches were statistically more successful. Right. And then he would usually, what I guess was successful was he'd make them think of like, oh, I know you sent a nude to your boyfriend. I was able to hack it. Why don't you send me another one and then this will be over with? He doesn't have a real nude.
It doesn't have anything.
But 4%, 5% of the girls might believe it, right?
Conversion rate.
And so that's the kind of situation that you need to teach your kids. If you get that message, we're not going to be angry at you. Even if you did send your boyfriend nude, you can come talk to us and we can help you out of this problem.
No.
And instead,
You talk
what
to
those
the
girls
parents
would do,
It's good that you're giving this to these 8th graders and young kids, but are you speaking to the parents as well and speaking to just adults in general? Because a lot of times people my age and a little bit younger are a bunch of know-it-alls and don't know when it comes to the security
and
stuff.
we're gonna talk.
And then
about
when I
It's
talk
not just
to
know-it-alls.
people,
It's just... So, I mean, I talk to people on the radio all the time.
ignorance is another thing.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the people that are know-it-alls.
Just
When I
make up
try to
stuff.
explain things to people about even just password sanitation,
Oh, no,
they look
I
at
don't
me
even-
as if
they're
I'm
crazy.
talking out the side of my neck and I'm going overboard over security. What is your approach?
We do talk to parents. Part of what you talk to parents about is create that open line of communication. Also, you have to have the expectation until your kids are out of your house, they have no privacy on their phone. I mean, it sucks to say it.
Oh,
but
I know that.
You know that, right? And so spot checks. And what will happen is we've had this with our kids where we say only one of them has a full-time phone.
Right.
It's time for a phone check. And they will preemptively admit something. Now, so far, everything that's been admitted has been kind of small potatoes, right?
Wow.
But you want that.
You planted the seed.
Yeah, you plant the seed.
Yeah.
And you create a situation where like they now have permission almost to share with you, right? So I think for parents, part of the problem though is the technical controls parents have suck, right? Like the good thing that Apple's finally made some progress here, and I think Apple's the company that has the most opportunity, at least in the U.S., because they dominate, teenagers.
Right.
Is they now have the ability to classify photos as they leave your kid's device to see if they're naked photos, and to stop them from leaving the device.
This was very controversial when Apple proposed this.
Well, there's two different things. There's a part where they're actually scanning your photos as on the device.
Right.
And I opposed that so much I wrote a New York Times op-ed.
I remember.
Right. So I wrote that part, but at the same time they announced something that I think is great, which is you could say, this is a kid. They should not send naked photos.
This is totally in the hands of parents. This is
totally
not going back to the corporate or anything.
Yeah. Right. And it never calls the cops.
Yep.
It never does anything. It doesn't even tell the parents.
Right.
It just stops the photo from being sent.
Right. And it even warns kids. Now, you sure you want to send that? It's good. It's actually, I think, well done.
Right. And I think those kinds of interventions.
Parents have to turn that on, by the way. Should mention that.
Yeah, you have to turn it on. I think it's under screen time settings. And so I think setting the screen time settings. So the other thing for kids is teenagers want to be on their phones all night. They don't get any sleep. And so having the phone turn off at 9 or 10 p.m., whatever
That's good for adults.
Yeah, no, I think so.
I hate to tell you.
No, I'm bad at that. But at least I could fix my problems with my kids.
Right.
Doing the screen time limits and then having no expectation of privacy. And I'd like to see companies get more aggressive about those kinds of limits on, hey, it looks like you're sending a naked photo. Is that something you really want to do? Here's some things that you should read first before you do that, right? And to at least because again, you said no frontal lobe, right? Like their decision making is
just
really
create
weak.
a friction.
And so create that friction that they have to think about it, I think is a good thing.
Go ahead. You were got to follow.
Oh, no, that was it. It was just the whole education side of it, far as speaking with adults. But actually, now I do have another question. You said nobody really wants to be a CISO anymore.
Yeah.
Nowadays, at least what I've been seeing and hearing is colleges are really trying to teach kids into into entrepreneurship and things of that nature. Even from the tech side of things, they're talking about writing code and developing apps and whatnot. But I don't really see a lot about security out there, even though we need security.
Yeah.
Is it just a push of telling people to be a consultant or just stay away from being a C-suite and just be a one-person team and consulting for all of these big banks and big corporations or whatever that's going to need information security?
Do you encourage your kids to hack?
I haven't taught my kids really to hack anything yet. I mean, they haven't showed as much interest, so that's fine.
I always wished my kids wanted to.
Yeah.
If dad does it, you don't want to do it.
Yeah,
so
no, you don't
safe.
want to do it. That's right.
The good thing is that most good computer science departments now have security classes you can optionally take, right? That was not true. When I was an undergrad, there was no undergraduate security class. I'd take a graduate seminar. It wasn't like a soup to nuts. We read papers, right? And so now you can take those classes thanks to, Dave Wagner at Berkeley, Dan Bonet at Stanford, Ed Felton at Princeton. They created these first classes in the early 2000s. And now that's pretty widespread. I don't know of a single school where it's required to do security. And this is something that Matt Bishop at Davis has thought a lot about, is how do we integrate security curriculum into just a standard computer science curriculum? It's just so packed, right? Everything you have to teach students in 4 years. And so what a lot of people have tried is, okay, well, we're teaching them basic programming. We'll also teach them basic security side by side with programming. Yeah. So I think that's a reasonable thing. But this is why I teach classes, right? So I teach a cybersecurity class for non-CS majors. So I have lawyers, I have MBA students, I have a lot of international policy students to teach them the intro to cyber and to get them actually hacking.
Right.
So they use non-programming hacking tools like Burp and WireGuard? Wireshark,
like that?
Yeah, so Wireshark is one of the things they use. They get to sniff Wi-Fi networks and stuff. And then
what's the point of that? They're not going to do that in their job.
The point there is there's a master's in cyber policy at Stanford, and that is the first required class. And this is effectively how I got to Stanford. That's
interesting.
But again, is it still just more about planting the seed and having awareness about what's going on around you from a digital standpoint, right?
Yeah. For those folks, a lot of them, my whole problem was... basically, I had this anecdote that I said to some of the professors at Stanford was, my first time to the White House, I was there because of this FSB breach of Yahoo, and we were briefing them on this investigation, and all of the techies were on my side, and the entire other side of the White House table was lawyers, and we couldn't speak the same language. Right. And so my thing was...
Certainly policymakers need to have this knowledge.
But they don't.
If you go to the National Security Council, the people who do cyber are either coming from a specialty in country, like they have a PhD in Chinese studies or in Russian literature, and they've been a Cold Warrior.
Which, by the way, was my major, but
cool.
I dropped.
It came back.
I dropped it.
Right.
No,
So
at
the
the time it was a good idea.
Yeah, and then like everybody was bored about Russia for a while. It was all about learning Arabic and learning about terrorism or something. And Russia's back big, man.
That's right.
Well, you see that actually at like Stanford, like the old Russia, like the people who were in like the Reagan White House are all super excited again.
The Soviet Union's back, baby.
Yes, right, yes.
Actually, I'm a little more worried about China, and maybe we should be. But
But to answer the question, and then I teach a trust and safety class to CS students, which is about hate speech and bullying, harassment, and child exploitation, adult exploitation.
Right.
Because I got kind of tired. Stanford will graduate these 23-year-old dudes. They're always guys who are like, man, I've got a startup. In this startup, you can take a photo and then anonymously send that photo to 100 women.
great
right, at the same time.
thinking, buddy.
What could possibly go wrong? And so my goal is like, well, if you take the class, you'll know the 17 things that have gone wrong anytime anybody is allowed to send a photo.
Right.
Interesting. And the intent with the lawyers is not to get them to be proficient with Wireshark, but to have them understand what's going on in the language.
Right, because when they are now in the White House, and so actually one of my students is now working at the National Security Council.
Nice.
And when she sees a briefing about the Lazarus group of the DPRK of North Korea, use SQL injection, she'd be like, SQL injection.
I know what
I
that
did
is.
that.
Yeah.
I did that in Stamos' class, right?
Good.
And so is she going to be a professional hacker?
No.
Is she going to
She knows what it means.
But she can at least communicate
Yes.
to the rest of the team that can help.
Which is a real problem in cyber policy.
Right.
It's like the people who do other national security policy often come from the military, right? Like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I don't know who, I'm sorry, I forget who it is right now. Is it Milley, I think?
I think it's Milley, yeah.
Yeah, he was like a Marine platoon commander, right? So it's like the dude was in the dirt with his dudes. He could probably still field strip an M16, right? But like the people who run cyber in the government they've never changed a hard drive. They've never reinstalled their operating system. They've never hacked a single thing.
Right.
And that's, I think, what we have to change is that the people who run cyber for our government, that they have to have at some point been hands-on at some point.
Is it your sense it's getting better? Because I think this has been a big problem.
Yes.
Is government not understanding even the ground that they're walking on.
It is getting better.
And also legislators. I mean, I guess it's their staff that needs to know this.
It's not getting better in Congress so much. I mean, you now have like the key, one of the problems is there's no cyber committee, and 5 or 6 congressional committees say cybersecurity is their problem.
Right.
And so you have
want a cyber committee? Do you really want one? The way they mess things up?
I think something like a select committee wouldn't be a horrible idea. Because what you end up right now is you have Homeland Security and Judiciary and Ways and Means and all these different people having some kind of cyber component and then not being able to have the real skill set in house.
Right.
There also used to be an Office of Technology Policy, right?
OSTP, it's back. Yeah,
it's back.
It's back. But what's more important, I think, the good thing Congress did is they created CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, under
huge.
DHS, which is huge.
Yes.
Because finally there's a technically competent defensive cybersecurity agency.
Yeah.
It used to be the only people in the U.S. government who really knew anything about cyber was NSA and Cyber Command.
Right.
It's all offense, all classified.
Right.
They would never help you out. In fact, it was kind of sketchy talking to them because you're telling them about vulnerabilities that you don't want them using for their own purposes.
NSA's always been schizophrenic, both defending our shores and attacking others, and that's always been a little schizophrenic. Your partner, Chris Krebs, of course, was the head of CISA, and left.
Fired by tweet.
Which
it turns out raises all these interesting HR questions under the Administrative Act.
I bet it does.
like of your 401k or your pension and stuff like that. Yeah.
Chris, of course, famously said the elections were well done. They were very with best elections we ever. Anyway. So CISA, though, is a little controversial sometimes.
Yeah.
But you feel like on balance, it's a good thing.
I think on balance is great. I think the current director, Jen Easterly, the second director ever, is fantastic.
Yeah.
She came out of the military and then had NSA and Cyber Command experience. Yeah. So we're in this weird place where there's a bunch of competent people and they all come from NSA because it's the only place you can come from in the government and have technical competence. Right. So I think it will be good in 5 years when hopefully we have people who did not come up through the offensive the spine.
Thanks to you and Stanford and more programs like that, I think.
Right. Yeah. Look, Georgetown does this, and Columbia now. And so there's a lot of schools who are trying to teach real cybersecurity skills to folks.
Jeff,
good to know.
Get in here. You've been left out over there in left field.
I think part of the reason that you're here is as the world started shifting toward Mastodon, I saw the Alex Stamos tweet it was a toot where you said, I'm cataloging problems. And I said, uh-oh, and I'm sure it's there. So I'm curious about two things. One, what you think of the structure of the Fediverse. But then second, and I was talking to a mutual friend of ours about just this the other day, if funders were to come into this space, as I hope they do, to develop at least tests, for example, around Black Twitter or around personally selected algorithms or around security, to bolster this new federated, wonderful little world that we see aborting. What do you see as the status of it, and what kind of work needs to be done, and what does it take to do that work?
Right, those are great questions. So the Fediverse has like inherent strengths and weaknesses, right? So the inherent strengths, obviously being distributed, you're not going to end up with a single person getting red pilled and all of a sudden making everything go nuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
You as an
Do you
individual,
think that's what's happened, by the way?
I think Musk is, when you're posting photos with 2 replica guns and 4 caffeine-free Diet Cokes.
Yeah.
The caffeine-free Diet Coke, that's like one step short of a Diet Dr. Pepper. Like if he had 4 Diet Dr. Peppers, I feel like California could take him.
It was a pun. Yeah. I think it was send lawyer guns and money. It was guns and Coke.
Yeah,
I think was the pun. But were they replica? That's a relief.
One of them was like was a video game replica. The other one's a musket, which might be a real musket. He has enough money that he could own a real Revolutionary War musket, which I think is actually pretty cool.
Okay.
I just think it's a weird. Anyway,
it's a bad thing to be posting.
I feel like
if you own a company like Twitter.
He's clearly. If I was his family member, I'd be really worried about him. I feel like he's having like a meltdown. Yeah. Okay, so the upside of the Fediverse is you can't have that come in. Some downsides, right? First off, the kind of privacy model of the Fediverse is like if you looked at the Cambridge Analytica scandal and you said, I want to build an entire social media network based upon Cambridge Analytica, right? Like the closest any major company has been to being as open as any Fediverse instance is Facebook with Graph API v1, which is the core API that caused the Cambridge Analytica and a bunch of other problems. So that is like a fundamental problem, is that you have no privacy in the Fediverse. People know this pretty widely right now, but your DMs are no way encrypted. They're seen by every single else. But then also, it is effectively trivial to make an archive of everything anybody says publicly in the Fediverse. The Mastodon developers and such don't build that into the system. They've avoided people having search and stuff, but these are just conventions. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact people are breaking those conventions and just effectively archiving the entire Fediverse in real time, which then does not all the rights that we expect under GDPR, under California's laws now are effectively can't be applied to the Fediverse and never will. Under the current design of ActivityPub, you cannot have privacy. Okay, so that's a fundamental problem.
As long as people understand that. You don't have privacy in DMs on Twitter now.
Right.
Well, no, that's not true. Like, your DMs on Twitter are protected by the Electronic Communications Privacy Act and the Stored Communications.
Legally protected.
Are legally protected.
Not technically
If Elon
protected.
Musk just published those, he'd be violating, I think it's 18 U.S.C. 2701, right? Like, that's a real federal law with a real federal crime. So, like, I think that might be true for the Fediverse, too. So what my colleague who I teach my cyber class with, Rihanna Pfefferkorn, is a lawyer, and one of the things I want to work on with her and the law students is like a legal guide for Fediverse, because does ECPA and SCA apply to you?
Thank you.
What kind of responsibilities do you have under the child exploitation statute? So 18 U.S.C. 2258A is like the provider responsibilities. Okay,
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm glad DMs are not private.
Right, yeah, yes. That if people thought they were private, they would be much worse. The other interesting issue is as Mastodon scales and gets more diverse and you end up with more and more people that you don't like on your instance, you're going to have to do more content moderation.
I kick them off.
Right. But the tools for that exist right now really suck. Right. Yeah. And I mean, like, the reporting, when you report something on Mastodon, you don't have the ability like you do on Instagram. You can choose how to report it and stuff. That means it goes into a different queue.
Right.
When it gets queued, ML looks at it.
This is less of a problem as they stay small.
If they stay small.
Right.
So if we believe in the vision, then we have to believe in a vision where you're going to have to do a pretty massive amount of moderation, and having a single queue that has no AI ML component, no automatic scanning, none of the tooling that is what people have spent billions of dollars to build at places like Facebook and Twitter is going to be a problem.
Right.
So this is actually one of the things we're doing. So we run cybervillains.com. I was just doing it for fun, and it's been successful enough that we're going to port it over and make it an official Stanford IO project.
Oh, nice.
And
You only have 94 users right now. It's
Right,
not.
it's not-
It's not intended to be a public instance.
No,
or-
but like we found some interesting stuff by playing with it. No, it is
Yeah.
public. It's going to be public. I haven't announced yet, but it's going to be stable. So if people want to be on it, what we do is it's intentionally an instance that people can hack, right? So we have a policy that if you want to try to hack it and find problems with it, you should
I
go
love
ahead and
that.
do so.
Go ahead and hack it.
Now that's
great.
We say in the privacy policy you have no privacy on this instance.
Right.
That is true for all of Mastodon.
I should probably
We're
say
honest
that in
about it.
my
You should
privacy
say that.
policy.
You should just say
yeah.
you have no privacy.
You have no
Right?
privacy.
Like I make absolutely no guarantee of anything.
Yeah.
Because you have no control over the security of that code.
Yeah.
Right.
Did not know that.
And so we're going to do that. But the other thing we're going to do is we're going to start running off of a fork of Mastodon that we're going to maintain at Stanford, where we work on trust and safety tools. So that I want to build out an API with my students of here are pluggable things of like, here's my hate speech detector, here's my classifier for this. Probably the first one will be child exploitation. So we're running a project right now to scan the Fediverse for using photo DNA, and it's not great so far. So we'll have some results published. But right now, the tools available to admins are pretty bad, and so we'd like to build those tools. And if they want to accept our patches upstream, that's great. Otherwise, people can try to use our thread. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be working on, is because I do think there's a lot of great future in federated networks, but we're going to have to rethink. All this trust and safety stuff is based upon the idea of large, well-resourced corporations owning the platform and having a legal team that tells them what their legal responsibilities are. The timing here, the thing I tweeted when Musk closed the deal was that his timing is crazy, and that he bought Twitter at the hardest geopolitical moment for social media companies of everybody wants to regulate social media.
It's midterms time, right?
Well, it was midterms, but also the day he bought it, the final text of the Digital Services Act in the EU was
DSA.
published. India has been publishing regulations. There's an online safety act that's extremely draconian in the UK. We just passed a not so great child safety law in California. So it's just a crazy time for him to buy himself into this area. And that's true for all Mastodon runners. And so if you're going to be part of the Fediverse, we're going to need to build better tools so that you can live up to the responsibilities, because the bar has been set here by billions of dollars of spend from large corporations, and you can't get there, but you can get somewhere, because right now we're down here.
Twitter's not that great. You go to report something on that, and it's work just to report accounts on that.
Yeah.
And
So
it
I just
shouldn't
added
be
a
that.
rule to my instance saying there's no privacy. Don't expect privacy. Even if you post a DM, consider yourself posting publicly. Thank you very much.
So
Hold on, I'm going to take a break. I want to talk about, you raised some interesting questions. I know Jeff will want to talk about the Earn It Act in Section 230. I want to talk about the assault on E2E, end-to-end encryption.
Yeah.
Because there are very few governments in the world that like end-to-end encryption, including our own.
Very few.
In fact, I can't think
and
maybe
the
Estonia,
UK
I don't
bill,
know.
as of today, the UK bill that Alex just
That's
talked
right.
about is basically forbidding encryption.
That's right.
Will forbid encryption in the UK.
Right. So that's a very hot topic right now. We'll talk about that and a lot more with a very special guest. This is an unusual edition of This Week in Google. We might not even get a change log. I just got to warn you.
Every week's unusual. What are you talking about?
Should I bring up Google? Because I feel like...
Oh, yeah, we'll bring up Google. We'll figure out a way to just stick. We always try to stick a little Google in This Week.
He already mentioned Chromebooks. That's
he
enough.
did
Perfect,
say
we're done.
Chromebooks.
There's
All
not
right.
much spam in it. There's just a little bit. And I want to reassure people who are saying, but Stacy had a variety of personal commitments, events she had to go to and things. We knew this ahead of time. This has given us a great opportunity to have some wonderful special guests. She will be back next week.
Yep.
She is not leaving the show, so don't worry.
I'm just off next week. I'm kidding.
geez.
I'm kidding.
But I
I'm
am
kidding.
always here.
Aren't you leaving
Always.
sometime soon?
Yeah, for the
Or is
14th,
that just
I
a dream I
teach.
had? Oh, okay.
Hey.
Our show today brought to you by Rocket Money. This single app has saved me, I almost want to say thousands of dollars. It's certainly saved me hundreds of dollars. Rocket Money. I first started using it when it's called Truebill. They've renamed it. Rocket's acquired it. They've renamed it, and they've made it, I think, 100 times better. Let me ask you a question I think you know the answer to right off the top of your head. Are you wasting money on subscriptions? God, we all have hundreds of subscriptions these days, right? Who could keep track of them? Rocket Money surveyed people, and they found 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. But that's not the worst news. They averaged, they thought, around $80 a month on subscriptions. Oh, yeah, about $80 a month. When they actually did the digging, they found out it was a lot closer to $200 and more a month. Many of those subscriptions not used, long forgotten. Do you have so in my case, it was a political contribution I made in the last cycle. And, you go to these sites for political contributions, there's always a checkbox that says, make this a recurring contribution. Then it's always pre-checked just in case for your convenience. Well, I didn't notice that. So I was giving a political campaign after the election. I don't even want to say how much money every month.
I love how you noticed it right during the read.
For months. Yes, you saw me do it. I went, what the hell? Thank you, Rocket Money. You saved me. I turned it off immediately. But the beauty of this is I didn't even have to turn it off. In Rocket Money, you'll see all your recurring subscriptions. You'll see which are duplicated. Sometimes you even have two of the same thing, which is crazy. I did have one for Day One, which is a journal. I had two subscriptions. So anyway, it finds those, and then you cancel it in the app. You just say, well, yeah, please cancel that, and it does it for you. It is incredible. All you have to do is press the cancel button. Rocket Money takes care of the rest. If it doesn't save you money right out of the box, you're just more disciplined than I am, I guess. Rocket Money. They used to call it Truebill. Maybe you have Truebill. If you had Truebill on your phone, look, because it's now Rocket Money, has a lot of new and wonderful features. It's great for budgeting, to see what your net worth is, see where your money's going. It's all sorts of great stuff. But the single most useful thing that pays for itself, get rid of useless subscriptions with Rocket Money now. Go to rocketmoney.com/twig. Was that on this show when I found that? That's hysterical.
Yeah, I remember you doing doing the read for Rocket, and you pulled out your phone, and he was like, I did what?
What? Since 2020. Seriously, it could save you hundreds of dollars per year. It saved me thousands. rocketmoney.com/twig. Cancel your unnecessary subscriptions right now. rocketmoney.com/twig. We thank them so much for supporting This Week in Google. You support us, of course, by going to that address so that they know you saw it here. rocketmoney.com/twig. This is more and more, that's it for the ad. You can take down the lower third. But I do want to comment on this because this is more and more of advertisers are saying to us, oh, yeah, we want to track all your listeners. They call it a tracking pixel.
Yeah.
Why don't you just put a tracking pixel on there?
Yeah.
So we can't put a tracking pixel. It's a podcast. Oh, no, we have ways. We say no. You'll be glad to know. We say no. But it's getting harder and harder as a result for us to find advertisers who are happy just selling a lot of product. Mm-hmm. Because this is the thing that irks us so much. Without exception, the ads do really well for them. But they say things like, well, we don't know if they came from your show. We don't know if that coupon code, maybe they saw it on another site. So, when you hear an ad, use that offer code, because that way they can't deny it, I guess. But number two, support us through Club Twit, because that is a really great way for you to spend a little bit of money, $7 a month, less than a blue check, I might add.
That's right.
You could, and everybody on Club Twit in the Discord has added blue checks now to their names, by the way, which is hysterical.
It's so funny.
Less than a blue check, but what do you get? You get every single show we do ad-free, and that means tracker-free, absolutely tracker-free, right? So right. Total privacy, because RSS, we don't know anything about you. You also get shows that we don't put out on the regular feeds, like Hands on Windows with Paul Thurrott, Hands on Macintosh with Micah Sargent, the Untitled Linux Show, which is a fabulous program for Linux lovers. I actually would like that show to get bigger, but you know what? Here's the problem. A show like that, it's hard to sell advertising on the Untitled Linux Show. Mm-hmm. Maybe if we had a title, I don't know. But Jonathan does such a good job of that show. So who supports it? The members. And that's why it's so important. We want you to join Club Twit. You also get access to the Discord, your very own blue check. If that rocks your boat, you can do that. See, everybody's got a blue check on there. Some of them have just little, I have a Twit logo, but everybody else has blue checks.
Yep, we got Twit bugs.
We got all sorts of, we got special emojis and things. And you get the Twit Plus feed, which has all those shows that we don't put out in public, plus a lot more stuff. For instance, we had great conversations. The best stuff before the show, almost always. Alex, we're talking with Alex. Great stuff. Didn't make it in the show, but we have it on the Twit Plus feed. So
What?
No comment.
So no, he didn't say anything bad, and I don't think. Anyway, we can pull it down if you want. Did I tell you that on the Fediverse you have no privacy? Did I mention that? Twit.tv/clubtwit. Twit.tv/clubtwit. Get your blue check for only $7 a month. We thank all our members. We have great members, and it's always a great conversation.
I officially joined.
You didn't have to. You had a
and I
freebie.
joined.
And thank you for doing that, Jeff. And for coders, we have in our coding section, we're all excited. We have our Club Twit Advent of Code leaderboard. It starts at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
Boy.
Tonight, I will be a little groggy for the next 30 days.
This is
always
in the
a lot
coding
of
channel?
fun. It's in the coding channel. If you
right.
want to do Advent of Code, join our private leaderboard. John Arnold set it up. And compare your coding skills.
There it is. I see it.
Oh, it's so much fun. We love Advent of Code is my early Christmas present. I love it every year. Oh boy! Already, I'm seeing.
Can I ask a follow-up question here to the Mastodon?
Yes.
I'll make it two questions because I'll cheat. I had a conversation with somebody who's starting a competitor to Mastodon. I'll just leave it at that. Who said, "Oh, the codes it has to be completely rewritten, blah blah blah." And I don't know enough about this to know what the underlying code base and how good it is. That was question one. And question two is, you have next to you a host of an instance. What advice do you have for Leo as a host?
That's a great question. So on the second one, like I said, I'd like us to be working on official recommendations for Mastodon hosts. I mean, right now, there's an open question of whether you're a electronic service provider as defined by federal law.
I'm screwed anyway. We have an IRC, we have a forum, we have Mastodon, we have a private Discord.
Right.
I got it coming and going.
So what I'd love to see is I think it would be great to get kind of legal and trust and safety services from a group of service providers that then you could pool and you could pay for insurance.
Yes.
I could totally see that you pay.
Well, we have an umbrella insurance policy,
Right, but
because
you
we're
pay
media.
like $1,000 a month for access to lawyers
Yeah.
and a
Guns
pool
and
where
money.
the top
Yes.
the top 10, the top 20 instances I'll pay for.
We don't now. At least for GDPR, you have to have a certain amount of income. You have to be a 50 million.
I don't think with GDPR, no. You're talking about DSA. So DSA has this idea of a very large platform, but for GDPR, some of the stuff kicks in at any level where you are processing data.
Right.
So, yes,
this is a shame because we're creating communities. They're nice communities.
Right.
I understand. I want to protect people's privacy. I want to protect their security. I want them to have the right to be forgotten if that's what they want.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I want to, without incurring massive liabilities and massive costs, which means only big guys can do it.
Yes.
I want to create communities.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about this for a while. One of the hard trade-offs in any regulation of this space is it is very hard to come up. You can come up with regulations that say it only works for the big guys.
Yeah, they're appropriate for Facebook. They're appropriate for Google. See, we said
But
Google.
like just doing that is hard, and it's under some legal regimes, it's a difficult thing to do under their rules, right? And it also doesn't make sense in a lot of cases. It creates gamemanship where people are going to like structure their companies and such in ways. But yeah, I mean, this is the problem of GDPR and some other regulations is you can't. What I would love to see is that when these regulations are passed, that they think about the 10-person volunteer project, that you don't want the 11th person to have to be a European privacy lawyer, right? That there is a 4-page checklist that you can go through to be compatible, but those checklists don't exist.
Right.
And this is.
Can I just assume, well, I'm a little guy, they're not going to go after me?
Sure. I mean, that's true for the situations in which you don't have civil liability for individual users. So for most of GDPR, you're probably okay because the
UK, you're screwed.
The complaints,
UK, you're going to be screwed.
Right, UK, you're going to be screwed under the new system.
Yes.
But under current GDPR, it has to go to the Data Protection Commission to be adjudicated. And so individuals don't bring the cases. The cases go through government agencies. I'm not totally sure under the Digital Services Act. Anyway, I'm not a lawyer. This is something that we want to work with the law school
Absolutely.
to write.
I'm not considering this legal advice by any means. Although Denise Howell, who is a lawyer, an IP lawyer, and is a member of our community, and has been on our shows many times, gave me all sorts of advice.
Do you have a registered DMCA agent? With the
I
Library
do.
of
I
Congress?
am the registered DMCA agent.
Like crazy
That's
stuff like
key.
that you never think of.
Yeah. That's important. That's
never
so
thought of
if
that.
somebody has a DMCA takedown, they know who to go to. They go to the USPTO. They do a search. They say, oh, it's Leo. Here's his email. They
That was the kind of
great.
great advice you gave Alex. I saw everywhere just saying, do that.
Yeah. Well, and
Do
then
yourself a favor.
a couple of big deals are going to be, if you're going to be in this space, is one, eventually you will end up getting a request from law enforcement. And at that point, you have to have lawyers that specialize. Fortunately, there are law firms that specialize in this. The one I usually recommend to startups is called ZWillGen. So a guy named Mark Zwillinger has done a lot of litigation on behalf of big companies, and his firm will also do small
Can you
companies.
leave me your card?
Sure. And then the other is, if you run into any child exploitation material, then a bunch of legal requirements attached to you.
You have to report.
Yes.
You can't
have
just
to
take it
report.
down. You have to report.
Right. So actually, Stanford Internet Observatory, if you look now in the NCMEC database of reports last year, we're now on the list.
Really?
We're official reporters of NCMEC, because one thing we
You
started
see
doing
everything.
is, because we're grabbing effectively most of Gab in Parler.
Oh,
and it's,
God.
and
That must be fun.
I will eventually be fired from Stanford, but I want it to be for some kind of really cool academic freedom issue. I don't want it to be because a 19-year-old looked at CSAM,
Right.
Accidentally,
Yeah.
right? And so we scan all of our incoming now, and we just catch stuff that alerts only the adults. Students are not told. It gets encrypted. We're extremely careful in how we handle it. But anybody who does this kind of stuff, unfortunately, child sexual abuse material is the water that finds all cracks on the internet. So whenever you have any kind of unmoderated space, it does become a problem.
Good grief.
Well, I moderate heavily, but you make that really important point. You have a duty to report.
You have to do a report, which is one of the things I want to work with my students is, one, recommendations for folks, but then also the code that you could just hit a button and do the report automatically.
Yeah.
Which the cool thing is there are services. Microsoft runs a photo DNA service that will automatically do reporting for you. You can actually fill out the information and check the box, and then it goes through Microsoft's team. But there's no way right now to integrate that with Mastodon, which is one of the things I want to work on.
Not yet.
Not yet.
And if 230 goes away, Leo, you are really effed.
Maybe. I mean, it matters what the Supreme Court does with the First Amendment, right? Like a lot.
Right.
But yes, he's probably after that. You don't win with the initial. You can't win with at the beginning of the process.
The nice
You
thing
probably
about
have to let it get
230 is many cases are just immediately dismissed
yeah.
because of 230. It protects you. There's no standing bye-bye. The
Shield.
judge says, yeah, you can't sue this guy.
Right.
He's protected. As soon as that goes away, great, I have the right to defend myself in court.
Right. And if 230 goes away, I mean, the internet will be for the Googles and the Metas and the Apples.
That's
and such.
really sad, isn't it?
Yes, it will be.
Yes, it is very sad. And it is effectively, I think it's where we're going in Europe, right? Is we're moving towards a direction where...
It seems that's not what they want, though.
Well, this is the problem with European politicians, is they think they can have everything, but they can't, right?
Yeah.
They
So
have
does
to,
U.S.
Well, in the U.S. we do nothing, right? So Congress just doesn't legislate anymore. The most important kind of 230 cases right now are all in the Supreme Court because the U.S. hasn't, all these senators talk.
Mm-hmm.
Congress hasn't seriously moved any bill, even out of committee, right? Whereas in Europe, they really do move legislation. But what's important in the U.S. right now is there's two big cases in SCOTUS next year. They'll come down next year.
These are First Amendment cases.
First Amendment and 230 cases
and
of what limitations. And so one of them effectively blames Twitter for terrorist attacks in Google. So there's one against Twitter, one against Google. It might be Google that's responsible, but basically saying you are responsible if a terrorist uses your platform to organize a terrorist attack, that you're responsible. So it's like a direct attack against 230, effectively.
So the big guys can afford, they have buildings entirely populated by attorneys. They can afford to defend themselves. The little guys just shut down. It has a chilling effect.
And so there's no competition then.
Which is
Big
why
guys.
Mark Zuckerberg
Right.
wants regulation.
It's
which is why you saw
regulatory
him make
capture.
that swap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of
All of a sudden, we're
I
seeing
wanna
all
be
these
regulated.
ads. And we're seeing all these ads from Facebook. We want regulation. We care about the quality of your
Every New York Times
you've got
podcast. Have you listened? I don't know if I'm getting targeted, if I'm in some segment, but every time I listen to The Daily, I get
It's
a
a
Facebook
Facebook
ad for we're asking for regulation.
They're everywhere. They're in NFL football games. They're everywhere. And it makes sense. And you introduced me to that term, Jeff Jarvis, regulatory capture, using legislation to protect your interests and to pull the ladder up after you, to prevent the
And it's
little
because
guys.
it's worked.
Exactly.
What they fought GDPR in Europe, and then your GDPR turned out to be fantastic for the big American tech
They
companies.
learned a lesson.
And so the lesson has been, instead of resisting, we should celebrate it. But what we should fight is any kind of de minimis standard and make sure that everything applies to every single competitor.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Jarvis mentioned a quote Mastodon competitor, someone you know is thinking about working on? Well,
yeah.
There's
maybe
a lot
my question
of
is more
the thing
for
to
you
really
is how is it
understand is that
competitive?
Mastodon is just a client to the Fediverse.
That's what I was going to ask. How is it even a competitive service if everybody is just connecting to
It's just another one. PixelFed is another one.
Right.
PeerTube is another one.
Yeah, no,
Portnola is
I was
another one.
talking about, and I was talking about
We're talking about Post News.
You're probably
Talking about Post.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think the very fact that Post in its very first page
It had some
of its
issues,
user agreement
security.
says that billionaires are a protected class.
Yeah.
Really tells you a little something about where that's headed.
And full disclosure is that I left the advisory board for Post and received nothing from them, and I'm not associated with them in any
I don't
way.
understand why Noah put that
the big
in.
mistake Post made was at the day during the week of the most movement, they still had a limited sign up.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Like if you really believe in it, then you just have to go all the way and push your engineers to scale and take the million signups because
Am I a nut for saying I believe in open source, non-proprietary, decentralized systems?
You're not a nut. You're just weird.
no, I think there's definitely a future there for sure.
Are they inherently more dangerous?
I wouldn't say they're inherently more dangerous, but it's more complicated. And there's nobody to turn to make it safer.
Yeah,
for you.
because it's decentralized.
It's decentralized, yeah.
Which is why I like it.
Which is, I think what we'll see is just like with email, one of the reasons you're on Gmail is they catch way more phishing spam.
Right.
Scam. People forget why Gmail dominated, but one of the reasons was Google was very good at spam detection.
Right.
Compared to Yahoo and AIM and Hotmail and others. And that was like a real selling point was the safety aspect of you're not just flooded with spam and scams all day.
Right.
So I think there is a future for a Fediverse, but I think part of it will be what protection you get from your instance host.
I had a really interesting discussion on the Fediverse this last. I got into two long threads. One after Jelani Cobb, who's the dean of the journalism school uptown for me, the rich people go to, called Columbia, did a New Yorker piece saying, I left Twitter. And I said, I don't know, maybe I side more with Sarah Kendzior's view that we can't cede territory in an information war. And then I got people going after me like crazy because you're supporting the Nazi. And I said, I'm just trying to pull friends over from the old place to the new place. The other one I got into was when I said, I miss the algorithm a little bit. I feel like I'm missing things as they go, and I would like to have something in my control. And I got the same kind of scolding. It's a very scoldy place. This
It is if you come in, if you march in with your little Twitter uniform on and your little Twitter kepi and say, things are better over there. They're better. Everybody come back.
But what came out in the end was a lot of really interesting, good ideas from developers. About one guy was already mocking something up where he could just look at his own feed and see who he missed in the last 12 hours, and it becomes a roll your own, choose your own, control your own service for you. That's what I'm really looking forward to in the Fediverse, is those kinds of add-on services, whether it's to recommend or to authenticate or to block stuff or whatever it is. I think there's a lot of opportunity to build on top of this. That's what excites me most.
Well, I think full text search is just going to have to. This is one of those like the ideas of the original developers of some of these products are not going to have. They can't be gods forever, right? So without full text search, you're not going to end up with people really wanting to use it.
Do you think that full text search, that Eugen Eugene's contentions, and he's softening on the QT one, but that quote tweet and full text search were vectors of bad behavior? You who study bad behavior, what do you think about that?
I think quote tweets for sure. I think full text search is, unless people use hashtags very aggressively, it's a basic part of discovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The contention is that because I can search for anything, I can use it to harass.
Right, but this is the problem, is the Fediverse is totally open. You don't even need to have like a registered instance to just pull down the entire content of Mastodon.social.
Right.
So people will create full text search engines.
Right.
The question is will it be under control and at all privacy protective or completely non-privacy
I split the difference on TWiT Social by turning on Elasticsearch.
Yes.
So we do have the ability to do some pretty good searching within our own instance, not full text search, but hashtags.
I'd like to start it with just my own posts. That would be a wonderful thing. About
you could search if you. Well, see, you're unfortunately you're on some other.
I know I'm probably going to switch, but
you don't have to
I
switch.
learned.
I don't want you to switch, but
you
you don't have to switch. Well, that's the beauty of the Fediverse. You stay in that silly little hovel that you call home. But no, seriously.
We love each other.
Tell. Are you on Journa Host or are you on Mastodon Social?
No, I'm on Mastodon Social because I wanted to see what it was like.
Does Gargron have Elasticsearch turned on there? You must have it on there. Maybe it's too big. It's such a big instance.
Maybe too big. It's so big.
Well, you can run it. I mean, you asked a question before about scaling. One of the problems with Mastodon is it's not built.
It's not designed to scale.
It's not designed to be able to scale out tiers. And so really, I think what we're going to see is a bunch of work to take these components of like Sidekick, Elasticsearch, and a lot more work around the Dockerization, the Yarn configs, the Kubernetes configs, so you can have individually scaling tiers, like a big company would, right? But like it's clearly something that they were used to running as one
We never thought
instance.
All these people would show up, for one thing.
Well, and also I think traditionally, probably you don't have a lot of developers working on this who have worked at real scale companies. And so
hobbyists.
Even
there's
Twitter in the first 5 years didn't know how to do this.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
It was a Ruby on Rails project.
Like Mastodon. I mean, there's also this question of whether Mastodon's going to be able to scale while it's still on Ruby. I think it will be fine, but they're just going to have to create a bunch of auto-scaling stuff so you could go put it up in AWS.
There's a huge amount of technology that goes into something like Twitter or Facebook. It's actually mind-boggling to think of what the scaling takes.
It is. Well, you guys were talking about the leap second last week, right?
Gosh.
Do you know why that's so important to Facebook? Why Facebook cares so much, and Google?
Yeah.
So it's the basis of humongous distributed file systems is perfect resolution GPS time. So in the roof of every Facebook data center, there's a very sensitive GPS antenna that goes into custom hardware that Facebook gets OEM'd from, and I believe you can actually download the patent, at least the patent, but the designs in the paper.
They run an NTP server, don't
right? And Facebook runs like a post NTP, something that's more accurate than NTP internally, because to do these transactions, when you do transactions in a distributed database or distributed file system, you use timestamps to figure out what the eventual consistency is of that. And so you have to have all of your data centers within nanoseconds of each other. And doing that's incredibly hard. It's especially hard if all of a sudden you lose a second or gain a second, right?
Well, they won, but not till 2035.
But that's like the kind of thing. But the nice thing is the difference is like Facebook and Google and these guys grew up before the cloud era. Yeah. And so I don't think it would take a lot to build scaling capabilities.
We know now a little bit better how to do this.
Well, and you can get it from AWS, like the basic infrastructure stuff.
Yeah.
Like the basic storage of the database, the database tier, the auto scaling, the load balancing, the global load balancing, the running of a global edge. All of that stuff is taken care of. It's just Mastodon has not been built for that. Like one of the first, I'm working on this code change, and I'm so bad at Ruby, but Mastodon doesn't pick up IP addresses from a proxy, so I run my instance in GCP behind the Google Global Edge. And so all of the IP addresses in my logs are wrong because it doesn't realize I'm behind a global edge that's rewriting the IPs. And so basic things like that are, have to get done. And then eventually a bunch of auto scaling work of all of a sudden 1 million people just signed up. Well, it's not a big deal because my system detected that, it called into AWS, it asked for 10 more web tier machines to be spun up, and it increased the database memory automatically.
One of the things that we are kind of at the mercy of a very thin layer of technologists who understand this stuff, and that's a small number. In fact, I was talking earlier about this. I think I'll be talking more about it. There has been an imperative for every company in the world to digitize, to go online. And there aren't enough good technologists to do that. Yeah. So very many websites are crap. Yep. Not just insecure, but unusable. A huge number of apps are crap. This came up for me because our son, at least the son is 19, he's joining the union. He works for a big grocery store. Mm-hmm. The grocery store site is crap, so he can't get his employee ID. The union site is crap because he can't log in. Apparently, it doesn't like Chrome. He can maybe use Safari. I don't know. Anyway, it ends up with a phone call to a tech support person who doesn't really know what's going on. The stack was probably written by somebody who's long gone. No one knows how it works. And this is universal.
Yeah.
But see,
and it's very expensive. These engineers are very expensive. We run on Drupal. We've just been, we've now realized that we're going, what is it, Drupal 9? The version of Drupal we're on is being deprecated next year, so it'll be insecure.
And it cost you a fortune to do that.
We had 2 sites. We basically shut down the Tech Guy site because it was $250,000. I think we've negotiated the Canopy down to $180,000 to update the TWiT site. It's very expensive for companies to do this. The people who know how to do this are getting are a thin crust of technologists.
That's what I was saying earlier. It's like people are being educated to jump into app development and
we're users. We're users,
startup
man.
and stuff, but
Nobody
we need
knows how
some
to make.
people that are going to be able to be plumbers as well as be someone that can go in and do a cable drop if we need to. You know, some folks don't even understand the idea of just dropping Ethernet.
I just
and
worry
plugging
about,
it in.
and I think we're starting to see this. In fact, some people, there have been stories about how big tech is enjoying what's happening in Twitter because it's disenfranchising the technology class, the engineer class, who have been so powerful. Mm-hmm. I don't think it is. I think they are powerful. And I worry that they were going to come. This is the new elite.
Yeah, I mean, to the area that I know best, we have this big problem in security of every Fortune 500 company is now a legitimate target of foreign intelligence.
And there are not
agencies.
enough CISOs to go around.
Right. And the number of people, not just CISOs, but directors and managers,
everybody.
and individual threat intel people and incident response folks, and security, product security folks who have worked at that level, who have played against the Ministry of State Security, who have tested themselves against the GRU and the SVR and have come out on top. The number of people who are in that category are in like the thousands, right?
And they command massive salaries.
Right. And so that's
because they can.
Because they can.
And they perhaps should.
And we've done a really poor job of creating economies of scale where you don't have to have a large team that can operate at that level. But like my guess of the Fortune 500 is 150, 200 of those companies are at least playing the game, right? That if they go up against an adversary of that level, they at least have a possibility of detecting it. Most of them, and then the vast majority of the Russell 2000, not at all.
All you have to do is look at the number of breaches.
Was Sony a switch?
Right. Sony was in that lower category before they invested a huge amount of money after their breach. Yeah.
They were so cheap for so long that they got bit.
Right. And also I think Japanese companies are particularly have a history here of security. Security is a tough thing, like in kind of Japanese corporate culture, of being negative, of, it's, I've worked with some Japanese companies, and it's an interesting issue.
But all you have to do is look at the number of ransomware attacks, the number of breaches to know we got a problem. We got a problem. All right, let's talk about
fascinated with the psychology you deal with, Alex. I mean, I just think that it's almost like if you were going to go back and get another degree, it'd almost be psychology.
Yeah, I'm good, Jeff. Thanks. Appreciate it.
No, it's true, though. I mean, you have to be a psychologist. You have to understand the adversary as much as anything else.
Yeah.
What makes them tick.
Fascinating.
And honestly, we've set this up in such a way that it isn't hard to have good OPSEC. It's easier to be an attacker than a defender, I think.
Yeah. Well, and for normal people, it's completely unfair that we digitize all their lives, we push all this tech into their lives, and we teach them nothing.
Right.
And by default, they're not secure. They have to take individual steps. I've had the thing that's also really blown this up has been the explosion of cryptocurrencies, because it's turned a bunch of hacking against individuals into actually super profitable. It used to be if you hacked like a normal dude, the amount of money you could steal, if you get access to their bank account, you get a couple $1,000 before Bank of America clamps down.
Right.
But I have a father of a personal friend who lost effectively his entire retirement savings, over $1 million.
In a crypto wallet. Custodial or?
No, through a scam where he thought it was safe, because it's almost impossible to tell the legit from the non-legit, especially if you're a boomer. Here's
the address to use right here.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not a good place for it is really unfair what we, the tech industry, do for individuals right now. It
sounds like you think the solution is a sort of a centralized service economy for security.
I think we need more economies of scale where companies can share security services. Yeah. And so, especially at the small to medium, managed service providers have been a big deal for the small to medium enterprises. And I think that's one of the good things that's happened over the years.
We thank God for our managed service provider.
Yeah.
I mean, honest to God, we have somebody so good that we don't feel unsafe.
Yeah.
But we're just lucky.
And the move to the cloud, right? Like, you have to be completely insane to run your own Exchange server in the year of the Lord 2022.
And a masochist.
Right. But people still do it. But that's the kind of thing, like one of the benefits is you can go to Google or you can go to Microsoft and you can pick a provider and you can amortize their huge security team across 1 million
Is
customers.
Google doing a good job?
Security-wise?
Yeah, I mean, not only, that's question one, and question two is for their users.
So for their actual internal security, I think Google's the best. I think they're probably the most secure enterprise.
From the outside, that's how it looks.
From the outside, They have had, 2009 was a huge turning point the Aurora attacks, which it's nice to talk to guys of a certain age because I could talk about 2009. I can talk about 2009 to my students. Is like
2009. I was in kindergarten.
Right. It's like when my teachers talked about Vietnam. Right.
Yeah,
like that's what 2009 is to them.
Yeah.
God, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so 2009, the Aurora attacks against a bunch of Silicon Valley companies, most famously Google, People's Liberation Army. Google invested massively in security after that. Like they spent, and it all came out of the co-CEOs, especially Sergey, his experience growing up in the Soviet Union, distaste for totalitarian countries. They spent a huge amount of money and they built out a lot of what we consider kind of standard. Like the whole zero trust model comes from this Beyond Corp idea that Google was the first one to popularize.
It also eventually prompted them leaving China.
Yes, they left China. To their credit, they're still not back, right? Like they've put their toe in, and their employees revolted. Compared to I keep on saying this, but people need to be reminded. Apple has done more for the Chinese Communist Party than any tech company has done for any authoritarian state.
Absolutely. And of late, they just did something to tamp down protests by blocking airdrop to everyone.
Yes.
And they're getting a pass on it, but this is the deal with the devil. If you want to be in this country, operating this country, you're going to be asked to do things like this. And that's what Google didn't want to do.
So Yahoo got proper crap for it.
Yahoo helped dissidents get jailed.
Yes. I was the first Yahoo executive to testify in Congress since that famous Jerry Yang situation where Tom Lantos, a Holocaust survivor, called him a moral pygmy while he sits in front of the parents of the Chinese dissident who had been arrested. Like,
wow.
That is not considered a win from like a DC law firm perspective.
God bless Tom Lantos, by the way.
Yeah.
Great
John,
member of Congress.
Let's pour one out for John and for Jackie Spear.
Jackie Spear also.
Who's been shot more times than 50 Cent and went to Congress.
Jackie
and just retired, unfortunately.
Was shot in the...
I was at the Examiner when that
happened.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
She has pictures of it in her office when you go there.
Horrific.
But a great rep. I don't know this new guy who's representing us, but Jackie was my congresswoman.
Yep. So Google, and then the second part of that is, it seems to be that they're doing as best they can for their users as well, enforcing 2FA, really encouraging people to do the right thing. I think even selling Chromebooks is really, that is a computer I can point to the least sophisticated user and say, you're probably safe using this.
Yes, I mean, Chromebooks is... about 14 years ago, when Chromebooks were first started, remember the Pixel books, like the first Google?
Oh, God, don't get us started.
Yes. So I went one Thanksgiving.
I'll start crying. Nostalgia.
And so I'm not neutral here. As a consultant, I worked on Chrome and on Chrome OS. And so, I got to see all the work that went on the inside. And so I bought those early Chromebooks. And one Thanksgiving, I took 4 of them back to Sacramento and gave them to my parents and my in-laws. And it was the best investment I've ever made in the Thanksgiving because it was just like, don't have to worry anymore.
Yeah, they just work.
Don't have to clean all the viruses out and not ask, like, what websites were you on? That you got all these viruses fighting for control of your browser. Yeah, it was great. I think Google was really early in having people focus on the psychology of their users and of user experience studies. So Adrian Porter Felt, who's there.
Who's on Mastodon, by the way.
Marissa Tabriz was her boss for a long time, the head of Chrome security. There's several people who are there who are like really early in building that out. And I think, I think as far as security for normal people goes, I think Google's doing absolutely the best job right now. Android's got problems. A lot of those problems are due to its openness. And I think, the fact that Android OEMs, if you're going to buy an Android phone, you have to buy Google, right? Taking all the extra crap and then waiting for your OEMs to patch, I think is not worth it. Get a Pixel. That's why I tell people, if you want to be in the Android ecosystem, get a Pixel. Yeah. And in some ways, I think Pixels are now more secure than iPhones. Like, Apple has really wasted their lead. NSO Group owning up iPhones over and over again.
With zero-click exploits.
Zero-click iMessage exploits.
Holy cow.
It's just really embarrassing. Now, I know the people at Apple, and they're working really hard on this, and they finally are getting it together, but they did not have real executive support for the fundamental changes. They finally have that. It got so embarrassing that this one company in Israel owned them over and over and over again, that they're finally making the fundamental operating system changes to jail iMessage to reduce the attack surface.
Seems like they did as much as they could, though. I mean, at one point it was completely not secure, but they've done a lot to lock it down.
Done a lot, not great. I mean,
Blastdoor, and
one of the problems is they're still writing everything in Objective-C. Like they have their own memory safe language that turned out to flop, right? So like I think part of the fantasy was,
is Swift going to make it better?
Well, it would. I mean, Swift is much less vulnerable to these kinds of attacks, but they don't use it for any of their core stuff, any of the core libraries. A lot of the core libraries are still C.
Wow.
Right? That they call out to from Objective-C.
Right.
Like a lot of their parsing code for video and such.
Interesting.
So
What do you hear?
I think they've made a fundamental mistake in their language.
It's interesting.
direction.
You can make that cultural mistake 10 years ago, and you're still living with it.
Right. And so now, I mean, the people who are being smart about this is Google is one of the companies that's been really pushing Rust. And so finally there was Rust support, I think, in Chrome, and there's Rust support in the Linux kernel.
In Linux, which is amazing.
And so I think like moving to the memory safe languages is where we have to go.
Yeah.
It's always something that has a 5-year time horizon. So start now. If we had done it 5 years ago, we'd be in way better shape, right? But that's people.
Is it hopeless at Microsoft?
Okay. Microsoft does. There's a lot of really good people at Microsoft.
We know some of them. Some of them work with us.
I think one of the problems with Microsoft is that they still sell all of their old enterprise stuff, and
Legacy.
The legacy stuff is in a level of sustained engineering that's not appropriate.
Yep.
The People's Liberation Army keeps on owning up Exchange.
Yep.
Over and over and over again, you have these attacks where tens of thousands of companies are being hit by the Chinese and their Exchange servers taken over. That's not acceptable. I think being on Office 365 is fine. For corporate side, we're on Microsoft 365.
But they manage
E5.
the servers, not...
Right. Yeah. Make it their problem.
Yeah.
Well, one of the problems here is you should never run a Microsoft product that Microsoft doesn't use. And Microsoft doesn't use Exchange anymore, right?
Right.
They use Office 365. They're on Azure themselves.
You're on Microsoft 365?
Yeah, we're on Microsoft 365 E5. Yeah. So one, you have to pay for E5. Unfortunately, like all the levels below that are less secure. They don't have all the security features.
Okay.
But yeah. I mean, unfortunately, like if you're a consultant and you're working with Fortune 500 companies, you have to be because they're all SharePoint, they're all Office, and so if you want to collaborate with them, you have to be on 365. Yeah. But so
Can I ask about another
that's
company?
But with Microsoft, go ahead, Mr. Jarvis.
Go ahead, Ant. You go ahead, because I was change the subject to another company.
Well, with Microsoft knowing Exchange is getting attacked so often and not really doing anything about it, that's just more leverage for them to say, come on over to the Azure side of things.
Right, but they'll never make the cut, right? Like, I would love for them to end of life their legacy products. They should just end of life Exchange.
Historically, been their problem.
They should just announce that Exchange is end of life.
They never want to cut off legacy because that's a big part of their business.
Right, and then they've done a couple of really cool experimental things, like the Windows S stuff, which is like the Windows Chromebook, which I wish they had really committed to, because we're now...
Nobody wanted it. Everybody turned it off.
Yeah, I think they made some...
They should have committed to it like Chromebook. They should have said, this is it. That's all you get. There's no turning it off.
Right. And so, like, again, the year of our Lord 2022, we're still running like 32-bit compiled executables.
Yeah.
And they have to do all this stuff to make the NT4 API. NTDLL has barely changed. When I did that work at Microsoft as a consultant, you see the source code headers. And this is like in the 2003, 2004 range. And so you look at the people who had worked on those headers as like interns and engineers, and they at that point were EVPs. Right. And so now those people are retired, right? The people who actually wrote NTDLL and all of the API stuff, that they have to do all this work to maintain compatibility, but then using virtualization, they do all this really smart but kind of hacky stuff using virtualization, especially to try to maintain backwards compatibility with the Win32 API, and then also reduce the possibility of a single piece of software going crazy.
Alex Stamos is our guest. Hold on a second. I want to take a little break. Then you can try another company. And I still have to get to end-to-end encryption because that's really an important topic. That'll probably be how we'll wrap it up because we've gone for a long time already. And
well, we could go.
Wow. We could go hours and hours.
And the thing about
Honey,
Alex
call
talks
the police.
as fast as I do.
I'm trapped here.
So
You're trapped.
He crams in all kinds of knowledge in a short amount of time.
It's so great. But I tell you what, it's a rich stew of information. And I'm enjoying every minute. KS Group is his consultancy. He's a professor, adjunct professor, and the leader of the Stanford.
You have to say adjunct. They get really pissy about that if you're if you pretend to be a real professor. Adjunct is Latin for fake. Yeah. I'm a fake professor.
But I'm not wrong in using it.
Sure.
You're a real professor? Are you a real professor?
I'm a fake. Adjunct is fine. You can use adjunct. Yeah.
I know because my father was a professor, and so we know about all these assistant professors, associate professors, adjunct professors.
I'm not allowed to live on campus.
Yes.
Right? Like that's how you know you're a real professor is when they give you a house.
Oh, that house. Those houses are nice. Let me tell you. Director. You should get it as director of the Stanford Internet Observatory, at least, I think.
Wow. I do not want those neighbors, so I appreciate it.
Very highfalutin. Very highfalutin. We will have a little bit more with Alex. Jeff will get to ask his question in just a second. But first, a word. This is actually really timely from SecureWorks. We were talking about this whole idea of kind of, there's never enough people, there's never enough time, there's never enough money to really do security right. That's why you got to think about SecureWorks as part of your security team. SecureWorks is a leader in cybersecurity, building solutions for security experts by security experts. They're your partner. SecureWorks offers superior threat detection, rapid incident response, all while making sure customers are never locked into a single vendor. They've got a really powerful, and actually I think it's fascinating, extended detection and response platform. They call it Taegis XDR. And I think if you just listen to the show, you know why it's time to get it, right? In 2022, cybercrime is going to cost the world $7 trillion. In 3 years, that number is going to grow to $10.5 trillion. In 2021, ransomware totaled, as far as we know, $20 billion in damages. Attacks occurred every 11 seconds. By 2031, it's going to be much, much worse, $265 billion a year. Strike every 2 seconds. I think that might even be a conservative estimate. Make sure your organization is not the next victim. With SecureWorks Taegis XDR, Taegis provides superior detection, identifying, get this is where I'm fascinated, 470 billion security events a day, then prioritizing the true positive alerts, eliminating alert noise, but giving you the information you need to focus on the real threat. But there's more. Taegis offers unmatched response, automated response actions to eliminate threats before the damage is even done. That's fast. With SecureWorks Taegis Managed XDR, you can easily leverage SecureWorks experts to investigate and respond to threats on your behalf. This is where they become a part of your team. You can cut dwell times, decrease operational burden, reduce cost, 24/7 by 365 coverage. So if you experience a Christmas Day security event or half your team is out sick, don't worry. SecureWorks is there. They're behind you. And of course, with companies facing this shortage we were just talking about of cybersecurity talent, SecureWorks acts as an extension of your security team on day one, alleviating cybersecurity talent gaps, letting you customize the approach, get the coverage level you need. Now, and Alex was just saying, this is the fun part. What happens if you think you've been breached? You find an intruder in your system. I want you to get a Post-it note right now and write down this number, 1-800-BREACHED. Put it right there on your desk, 1-800-BREACHED. That connects, whether you're a customer or not, that connects you with the SecureWorks Emergency Incident Response Team. They can provide you with immediate assistance. It's so nice to know these guys are on your behalf. They're on your behalf 24/7, responding to and remediating a possible cyber incident or data breach. You don't have to go it on your own. Of course, you've got a great team. I'm not saying that. Just make it better with SecureWorks. At SecureWorks, you can learn more about the way today's threat environment is evolving, the risks it can present to your organization. They've got case studies. They've got reports from their very prestigious counter threat unit, and a lot more. Visit secureworks.com/twit. Get a free trial of Taegis XDR. Secureworks.com/twit. Please use that URL so they know you saw here. Secureworks.com/twit. TWiT. SecureWorks. Defending every corner of cyberspace. That's exactly what we were just talking about. All right, Jeff, you had a question about another company for our esteemed guest, Alex Stamos.
Oh, it's just obvious, brief gossip. Do you know anybody left at Facebook? Do you hear anything? What it's like?
What do you hear? What do you know?
The whole thing got steamrolled with Twitter blowing up, and 11,000 people, a lot of people I know who were there are gone. What do you hear?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, they're out of the news. Somebody pointed out, like, for the first time ever, Facebook was not anywhere on the front page of Tech Meme, right?
Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
I mean, nobody, I said this at the beginning, nobody was going to be as happy about this acquisition as Mark Zuckerberg, because, you know,
the heat is off.
Right, his argument is this is a super hard problem.
Yeah.
We're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And unless you've got somebody who just doesn't give a at all, it's hard to make that argument, right? And because
Now he's got that person.
Now he's got that person. He's like, oh, you don't like me. I think you really want to talk to this guy. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is what's going on there. I mean, I think there are some negative trends. You know, Facebook's not doing great from a financial perspective. The stock is way down. They had the layoffs. A couple of people I know got laid off. For the most part, the security and safety teams were spared from the layoffs. So the vast majority of the security people I know there are still there.
The folks working with newspapers are gone.
Right. I think a combination of two things, though, is worrying me from a trust and safety perspective. One, I'm a little afraid that a lot of the investment that was made in the post kind of 2018 timeframe into trust and safety work, which was significant, was really based upon unsustainable revenue numbers for Facebook, and that will be a place that they cut first. Second, whenever Mark Zuckerberg loves to be in a corner, right? Like, he loves to be in a situation where people tell him, I think he doesn't like the fat and happy times.
Oh, interesting.
I think he likes the times when people tell him, you can't do this, you're going to fail, right? Like the story you always hear, like in the, I went through engineering boot camp, right? And got my butt kicked by all these 23-year-olds who had just graduated MIT, right? But I'm going through like engineering boot camp, and they tell all these stories of the good old days. And, one of my concerns about Facebook at the time was it's a very small C conservative company about looking backwards of the good old days when it was only 300 people in the bad office in Palo Alto. Yeah. And, the 2010 or so, 2011, people were like, you'll never make money, you'll never make the move to mobile. And that's when Mark Zuckerberg was happiest, when we could crush it on mobile, right?
Proving people wrong.
Yeah, proving people wrong. Yeah, so I think he's always looking for that moment where he can prove people wrong. And I'm a little afraid that we are past that from the safety perspective, that people said, you can't get a handle of these things. And they did better. I have my issues with what the company has done in a number of ways, but they invested a huge amount of money, that he has now moved past that and is back to now, can we make the metaverse work? And in doing that, his eye is off the ball on the fact that they have 3 billion users that are using their current products that are not in the metaverse. When they did the meta thing, I was actually first happy because I thought it would be an Alphabet thing where Facebook became its own company and had its own CEO, like a Chris Cox running it. And then Zuck would be the CEO of Meta overall. But Zuck still runs the Facebook product as well as all the metaverse stuff. And I think like he's probably too distracted there. And so I'm worried about the distraction. I'm worried about the spend of money. The other thing that's happened is since the Hagen documents were leaked, so there were some like legitimate scandals in those documents. Most of those documents are people trying to do their job, which is a hard job, well. And the leak of those documents has massively changed the internal culture at Facebook, where there's no longer any openness about talking about safety issues, integrity issues. And the long-term impact of that document leak has been that a bunch of people, I think, have lost their jobs, are not being hired, that there's not going to be investment in quantitative social scientists to do that kind of work. And that, I think, is a huge loss for the entire industry, because Facebook was really the only company doing that at that level. And we've seen the peak of that, and it's over. And now if you're Zuck, you're like, well, it doesn't matter, because doing anything is better than Elon Musk, right? So like he now has somebody who is so much worse than him, who just straight up overrides his team, who...
The bar has been lowered,
The bar has been lowered. I mean, Twitter's going to have either a child safety scandal or they're going to have a breach, right? Like you can't run a company of that size, of that complexity, with that small of a team. The amount of risk he is running every day is an unsustainable amount of risk that if he had a board of directors, which he doesn't, their audit committee should be losing their minds right now. But they don't. He's the audit committee, right? Yeah. So from Zuck's perspective, I think the pressure is really off. And so I am really worried about where we're going now, that we might have seen the peak with like the 2020 election was the peak of focus on integrity issues at big companies, and it's just been downhill since then.
Do you think we're going to have trouble in the 2024 election?
it can go both ways. I mean, the upside of what happened in 2022 is the election deniers lost, right? So like in a world where a bunch of election denying secretaries of states won, and it was successful for people to election deny, but the tech stuff has always been downstream of the culture. I think this is one of the places where a lot of the popular, you might call the New York Times position on tech is wrong. They see the tech as leading the issue, whereas I see the tech as reflecting the culture, the political culture of the United States. And so the shift in the political culture is going to make things better, not because the companies are doing better, just because there's going to be a lot less demand.
It's good news.
It's good news. I don't think that'll be true outside of the United States. And I think the most important country to keep an eye on in any of these, of the retreat of democracy and of tech regulation, is India, right? India is legitimately democracy. Modi received roughly as many votes as there are people in the United States, right? Like he was legitimately elected, and he's using the power that was legitimately given to him to crush his enemies using the power of the Indian state, right? And that is like a serious problem for these tech companies, especially if you're Facebook and Twitter. They are locked out of China. It is very hard to be locked out of China and India. So because they are locked out of the entire Chinese market, especially for Facebook, because Meta is still a public company, Musk can do what he wants to do. But for Meta, it's a big deal for your shareholders that you're locked out of China. To also be locked out of India would be unacceptable, and that gives a huge amount of leverage to India.
You can't work in Philippines or Indonesia.
Yeah.
So your choices are limited.
Well, and access to the market, right? Of access to those billions of people. So, I'm less worried. I'm a little worried about 2024. I have a foreign policy piece I'm working on right now. Of one of the problems is the entire team at Twitter that looks for foreign interference is gone. So if you are the Ministry of State Security, if you're the People's Liberation Army, if you're the GRU of Russia, if you're the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Twitter is your number one focus. I think the one after Twitter is probably Telegram, because Telegram is now the most important platform for the extreme elements in U.S. society. So if you want to manipulate people who might actually turn violent, then you're investing heavily in Telegram.
Wow. Not much we could do about Telegram.
Not much you can do about Telegram. And
Pavel Durov's a Russian citizen living in Dubai.
Right.
He's completely out of our reach.
Yes. And I think you could call his Facebook status with Putin it's complicated, right?
Yep.
Like he left Russia and fled Russia, but mostly for like financial things, not really political. It's not clear.
Kind of Putin stole his company.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm presuming he doesn't have a lot of love for the regime.
Right. But I don't think the guy's a Thomas Jefferson.
No,
right? Like,
I agree. Yeah.
And so.
But also, even if he were, that platform is kind of intractable. It's a messaging platform. That's pretty hard to police.
Well, it's messaging and it's not. Like the large groups there are very large.
100,000 groups. Yeah, 100,000 people groups.
Those, in our monitoring of election disinformation, one of the things that's happened post January 6th is you have a huge fracturing on the American right of social media platforms, right? Gab, Parler, Truth. Rumble is a big one to watch. Rumble is competing with YouTube and has effectively no controls on disinformation. Oh boy. But Telegram is where we saw people doxing poll workers, talking about taking their guns to protest, stuff like that. So if you're trying to actually drive Americans to violence,
that's where the organization is happening.
And the problem for us is the Russians are all over Telegram because Telegram is the most important platform for the Ukraine invasion, right? So if you're the GRU, you have a huge team already dedicated to Telegram. I think right now, one of the things we benefited in 2022 is the Russians have their own problems, right? They are focused on the war they are losing in Ukraine and the drop of support for Putin domestically. I think a lot of what happens in 2024 vis-a-vis Russia will depend on what their domestic political situation looks like.
Just like China.
Yes.
Settle a bet for us.
Okay.
So I won't put words in your mouth, Jeff.
Why make this dating?
But you stand in defense of tech and tech platforms.
I stand in defense of the internet.
Of the internet
tech platforms having to run it now.
Yeah. I guess the debate is who's responsible for keeping people well informed? Is it my responsibility as an individual not to fall for this? Or is it the platform's responsibility and government's responsibility to protect us from disinformation? Who's responsible?
Okay, so I don't think there's a right answer here. I think everybody has to have their own kind of...
A lot of people will say, well, look, you just got to train people with critical thinking. They're believing they need to start, treating stuff from the internet is not from the mouth of God, we can teach people that.
I would say for all trust and safety issues, the responsibility of tech companies is not to make things worse, right?
Yeah.
Everything we're talking about here, propaganda, disinformation, the abuse of children, terrorism,
Right.
hate, racism, not exactly new things. Certainly not new in American society, right? All really deep-seated pathologies of human civilization, and some of them are specific pathologies of America.
Yep.
Right? Based upon the original sins of the United States. And so the responsibility of the companies, I don't think, is to make people better or to solve those problems, but it should be to not make the problem worse.
To not weaponize disinformation.
To not build their products in a way that it creates a unique advantage for their products for those things to happen. Right?
There you go.
That's how I think of it.
An algorithm, for instance, which exacerbates this.
So I have an anecdote here, right? So like when I first joined Facebook, the number one trust and safety problem was terrorism, was ISIS particularly, right? So like, Islamic terrorism, not a new thing, but ISIS was unique of being like the first millennial terrorist group where they were internet first in their propaganda strategy in a way that nobody before had been. Very, very smart in their use of the internet to radicalize and to recruit, especially disaffected European Muslim men, right?
It was highly just mainstream all around.
Yes.
Any and everybody knew ISIS.
Very good production values for their disinformation, for the propaganda, very good distribution means, and the ability to make it seem relevant to people's lives in a way that like an Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
Like,
the first internet first terrorist group.
Right, yeah.
It's fascinating. I never thought of it that way, but you're right.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I got to Facebook, that was the big thing, right, was ISIS. And I was in a meeting because one of our key executives had come back from the UK. There had been a horrible murder in the UK where the people who had committed the murder, the terrorists who had done so, had been hanging out on Facebook. Now, they were also under surveillance by MI5, but the UK government kind of covered that up, right? The conservative government, they blamed Facebook for this attack. And so our executive had been screamed at by David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK, as being personally responsible for the death of this off-duty British service member. And so we're in this big executive meeting, and somebody asked, we're talking about we need to really upgrade our fight against ISIS. We need to figure out what to do, which I think was correct. But somebody asked, okay, what's our goal, right? Like, this is a tech company. You got to think about what your goal is, and then you could try to come up with OKRs that you can manage to that goal. And that executive who just got yelled at said, our goal is to defeat terrorism. And to his credit, my boss, who's the general counsel, was like, whoa.
No, that's not Facebook's
Let's pump
job.
the brakes. Yeah. He's like, that is not our job.
Yeah.
Our job is that we don't make terrorist lives easier, right? But whether ISIS is defeated or not is something that is out of our hands. And if we make that our goal, then we will lose, and we will lose ourselves, right? And I think that's true for all these issues.
That's a good point.
Is that you can't say we're going to solve the problems about American democracy. We're going to solve. This is where, the big controversy around Twitter and disinformation was the Hunter Biden laptop story, which again, only taken down for a couple of hours, created a massive Streisand effect. The idea that Twitter doing that affected the election is ridiculous from any kind of quantitative measurement. But okay, but I think it was a mistake by Twitter.
Yeah.
And the reason Twitter made that mistake.
Which you all says now, I think.
Which you all says, and Jack says. But you can understand how they got there, because when you look at the 2016 campaign by the Russians, there was the online trolling stuff that the companies really responded to that was a pure online, but there was also a hack and leak campaign. Who was the target of the hack and leak campaign? It was not Facebook and Twitter. It was the New York Times. It was CNN. It was the Washington Post. It was especially Fox News, right? And so the problem there is that Twitter was thinking, we're going to defeat foreign interference in our elections. And in doing so, they took upon themselves a responsibility that was not their responsibility, which is keeping the New York Post from being manipulated.
Fascinating.
Now, in the end, it turns out the New York Post was not being manipulated. But at the time, it was not a crazy assumption. It seemed very suspicious. But they took upon a responsibility for which they did not have the appropriate data. They did not have the appropriate kind of like democratically controlled mechanisms. It was not their responsibility. And as a result, they overreached and they caused much bigger problems.
So ultimately, their mistake was taking on too much, to trying to do too much.
Right. They should have restrained themselves to, we will stop foreign interference on Twitter.
Right.
And I think another reasonable thing if you're a tech company is we will help smaller tech companies do better by sharing information, sharing tools, sharing intelligence.
Good.
Right. But we're not going to solve the problem. The problem of foreign interference in U.S. elections is actually a universal problem. It is built into the First Amendment. We allow foreigners to have First Amendment protected rights.
Right.
We allow Russia today.
We can't fix that.
Not without losing who we are as Americans, right? And certainly Twitter can't fix it, right? And so that's my position on all this stuff is, are you making things, you yourself, your company, making things better for these bad guys? And that is what you have to focus on reducing, not on solving the overall problem, because
that's
the truth
a much
is,
easier job.
That's brilliant.
And these problems are hundreds of years old,
Yeah, you can't
thousands of years old.
Exactly.
And they
weren't caused by the
internet.
internet.
They will exist in 1,000 years.
Good answer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good take.
Boy, we're out of time. I don't want to open the Pandora's box of end-to-end encryption. The UK is.
I also want to hear about TikTok.
Oh God, we didn't even start with TikTok. All right, let's do TikTok. That's much more interesting because this end-to-end encryption thing is going to go on forever. Should TikTok be shut down as a channel for the Chinese government to influence?
I think
that's a harsh way to ask it.
No, I think the United States should pass a federal privacy law that is our GDPR, but more specific, and that, unlike GDPR, explicitly recognizes that some countries are allies and some are not, right? And some are adversaries, and there's a bunch of countries in the middle. And so I would like to see a federal privacy law that binds all tech companies in a bunch of ways, but one of the ways it binds them is it does not allow certain information about American citizens to be stored or processed or accessed by the citizens of certain countries.
That's fair.
And that would include the People's Republic of China.
Not force TikTok to be owned by an American company.
Right. I would like this law to apply for TikTok and Apple.
And Facebook. Let's face it.
Wow.
Well, right. So Facebook does no data processing in China, but the domestic stuff around rules, the domestic rules should apply to Facebook.
Yep.
Certainly.
Yep. That's a good point. Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, just announced that TikTok is banned in government offices in South Dakota, which is
I'm sure it was a hot item.
Of the Chinese, so here's my hot take. Of the Chinese companies we should worry about, WeChat is a much bigger one for me. I
agree.
Because WeChat is a massive tool of surveillance against American companies.
We don't know about it because it's used by Chinese nationals abroad.
Right. But every American company has Chinese-speaking employees.
Yeah.
They are not intentionally doing anything bad.
No,
but they all have WeChat
They all
installed
have it.
because it's the only way they can talk to their family.
Right.
Yep.
Which is effectively a subsidy by the Great Firewall
Yep.
to make WeChat used around the world. And every single company has effectively an employee resource group that is on WeChat of Chinese-speaking employees. That's fine if what they're talking about is, I don't like this manager, this HR thing's going on. It's not as cool when they're talking about tech stuff, and this is something we actually had at Facebook, which is we had information that we knew landed in the hands of the Chinese.
Wow.
That one of our theories was it had been discussed by, Chinese-speaking employees. They didn't understand that everything they wrote was being logged in Beijing.
Wow.
So WeChat, if we're going to start with something, it should be WeChat. Because also TikTok, it has almost no private communication on it, right?
It's just watching videos.
Right. Where WeChat,
privacy's
people
not the issue.
buy stuff, they buy drugs.
Right.
They probably communicate with their mistresses. There's a bunch of blackmail material on WeChat.
We know they're seeing a lot of escort ads. We know that.
They're seeing a lot of escort ads. And then the other thing WeChat's used is it's used to control the Chinese diaspora in the U.S. You see university groups and stuff where if you read any of these indictments of people who have been turned by the MSS, Ministry of State Security, while they're in America, there was just one a week ago by the FBI right before Thanksgiving. The word WeChat's all over it.
Yeah.
That is how you reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
That is how you threaten them. That is how you point out that the MSS has control of their parents.
Wow.
WeChat is the platform I think we should worry about.
I think we're going to wrap it up and just say
been
we got
spectacular.
so much more to talk about. I hope you will come back. You have an open invitation. It's really great to talk to you. Next time you can Zoom.
Yeah.
You don't have to. I mean, thrilled you're in studio.
Yeah,
it makes it
indeed.
so much more fun.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to promote or?
I mean, if you want to read any of the stuff that these reports, io.stanford.edu. And if you're a company looking for consulting help, it's ks.group. I work with Chris Krebs. He's a great guy. And we try to help companies out.
So much respect for Chris. So impressed with.
He's a great guy. I mean, when the cards are down, he made the right call. Even though he has 5 kids, that's tough to walk away from your
No
healthcare.
kidding. Yeah, no kidding. The Internet Observatory. Lots of interesting stuff.
That top one, that's our report about the U.S. doing this stuff. So if you're interested.
Very interesting.
We called it Unheard Voice because nobody. And the sad part is this report is now being cited by Iranian propagandists and Chinese
of course.
propagandists.
See, they're doing it too.
It's just the sad mistake our government made.
Yeah, that's why we don't do it.
Yeah.
Wow. I just, such good material. I have food for thought for weeks. I am so glad you are all here. We don't need to do anything but just wrap the show up, I think.
All right.
Is there anything you want to plug?
I want to plug Club TWiT.
Thank you.
Plug Club TWiT.
You are a community manager.
I'm community manager, and all of the support is greatly appreciated.
But it's just a fun place to hang.
Everyone here at TWiT.
Yeah.
I have a short
you're going to
notice
play
event tomorrow.
Uno
so come play some cards with me at 4 o'clock.
How
Pacific
fun. I might
time.
join you in that. That's
So
great.
just hop on in
I
there.
want to see you do bingo.
Hey, well, I'll figure that out one of these days. But
We can do this in the Let's Play chat channel, which is
it's going to
great.
be in Let's Play
Yeah.
if you're a Club
And you'll
TWiT
have our
member.
friend Glenn Fleischman soon.
Yep.
And Glenn Fleischman.
I've been giving him recommendations in Berlin. He went to the Kaufhaus des Westens, the KaDeWe, which is this amazing department store, because they have this huge, amazing food floor. And he came out just saying, like, capitalism went too far.
He did have the best breakfast he's ever had, I understand. He really is enjoying himself. I
He's
can't wait to hear his
awesome.
stories. Glenn's with his son in Berlin. What a great time.
He's awesome.
Stacy's book club this week is this month. This next month is
It'll be in January.
Whatever.
Project Hail Mary.
Oh, it's next year.
Next year. Next year's book club, January 12th, Project Hail Mary. Great book. I will be there for that because I've already read it. It's fantastic.
I'm rereading it.
Well, and watch our interview that we did with
Andy Weir.
Andy Weir on a triangulation a few months ago when it first came out.
Yep.
And then the Laportes are going to do a Inside TWiT January 19th. All of this is available, but only if you're a club member, twit.tv/.
You should join, folks.
I'm going to start a hashtag
cause.
Andy Weir right in the third person. Let's see if we can get him to.
It's always him. It's all about him all the time. I don't understand. We were going to have him on a few months ago, and he just had a baby, which is great. Very happy for him. But I think now that the baby's probably 4 or 5 months old, he's probably anxious.
You want to get out?
Like,
Anxious to come on a show.
please.
So we'll try to get him back on. The movie Project Hail Mary is moving forward. He'd optioned it. He told me at the time that Ryan Gosling was going to play the
remember
lead,
that.
which I
Him.
had mixed feelings about. Let's put it that way. But we'll see.
I have this problem in that HBO bought a Facebook book that I'm.
Oh.
And so Claire.
Who's playing you?
Well, we don't know who's playing me, but it's Claire Foy, from the.
I love Claire Foy.
Is Cheryl. Oh, so I'll probably get Zach
It's gonna be
Galifianakis is my expectation.
it's exactly what you're getting. Bad news.
Right, him doing he wants to do his like legit turn.
Yeah.
Right, he's gonna do some prestige HBO. Yeah.
Oh, and she's just going to bat those big eyes at you, and it's over.
That's Zach.
It's over.
And then
That's
he'll
Zach.
have food in his beard.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Alex.
Thanks,
that
man.
sucks. That sucks. Jeff Jarvis, thank you for being here. BuzzMachine.com.
Thank you for doing this, boss.
What was your idea? Get the Gutenberg books coming out next year. You can get on the list by going to bit.ly/buy-Gutenberg. Jeff, of course, is the director of the Town Heights Center for
Gutenberg
Entrepreneurial
parenthesis.
Journalism at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. We will do two.
Whose birthday, 70th birthday, is December 6th.
That's a big one.
That's a big
Is he
one.
going to do a big thing? My 66th
By the
was
way,
yesterday.
happy belated
And they
birthday
made me
to
eat.
you.
They forced me to eat a lot of cake. Just so
Happy
much cake.
birthday.
Any more cake left?
There's more cake. It's at my house.
Aren't you glad you're
Oh,
off
okay.
that stupid diet you were on long
I'm
ago?
still on it, and I'm paying the price for eating all that cake. So good, though. Happy birthday, Craig. That's awesome.
Indeed.
Happy birthday, Leo.
I guess that's it. What a special episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Alex, what
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Alex.
Really great
Just
to meet
great.
you. Thanks for the work you do, which is clearly incredibly important. We thank everybody who watched the show. We do This Week in Google every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2200 UTC. Watch live at live.twit.tv, chat live in the IRC or in our Club TWiT Discord. After the fact, you can download copies of the show from the website, twit.tv/twig. Watch it on YouTube. In fact, this would be a good one. Everybody, clip out some salient quotes from Alex and send them to your CEOs or your IT department. Let them know. That's all on YouTube. And, of course, the best way to listen is to subscribe, and you get audio or video the minute the show's done, and never miss another episode. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll see you next time on Twig. Bye-bye.
The world is changing rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that it's hard to keep up. That's why Micah Sargent and I, Jason Howell, talk with the people making and breaking the tech news on Tech News Weekly every Thursday. They know these stories better than anyone, so why not get them to talk about it in their own words? Subscribe to Tech News Weekly, and you won't miss a beat every Thursday at twit.tv.